You want me to wait another minute? Yeah, we
It's
can
10
start.
5. We can
Fine.
start. Yeah,
Yes.
please start.
Good morning, everyone. This is Deepthi from Hemang Doshi Academy. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the commencement of our new program named ISA, that is Information Systems Audit Associate. Today, we mark the beginning of an important learning journey, one that is designed to empower you with practical skills, industry relevant knowledge, and the confidence to excel in the dynamic world of IS audit and compliance. I would like to introduce the mentor and trainer for the program, Mr. Taha Hussain, an IT domain leader with an extensive experience for around 25 years, having expertise in multiple areas like general IT control audit and review, data analytics, risk assessment, and control advisory services, and many more. On behalf of Hemang Doshi Academy, I extend a warm welcome to each one of you in the maiden batch. We are excited to have you all with us and look forward to seeing your transformation as progress through this journey. Thank you, and once again, welcome to the program. Happy learning. Sir, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Deepthi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope you guys are able to see and hear me, right?
Yeah, I could hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so uh, I would like to just, set certain, how do I say? Thanks, Deepthi, for the introduction. And I'm very, or I would say I'm really excited to basically share this material, this content with you, share my learnings with you. Basically, I started in an era where we did not have, or rather, the internet was not so popular at that. I would not say so uh, knowledge oriented at that time. You couldn't just get anything on the internet, and we started IT controls in that era. And today we literally have LLMs, which you just type in and it gives you the whole course presentation, whatever it is, right, that you need. So I'm really excited to just share my learnings over this particular point of time, what got me into IS audit, and basically what are the considerations that we need to keep in mind when we basically talk about IS audit, and how you can get into this particular uh, profession, or I would not even say profession, how you can basically enhance yourself to become an IS auditor. That's the only way I'm going to put it, right? There is no special, uh, certifications and all help more from a professional perspective. But let's say you want to get into it, what you need is just an open frame of mind and some amount of practical, uh, I would say, thought process in terms of how you identify systems, how you look at systems, how you understand technical aspects. So this course is going to be, how I have structured it is basically it's going to be some parts theory where, I'm going to take you through concepts, right? That's going to be a little boring, unfortunately, but then that is really, really important to basically get when we get onto the practical part, right? When we get onto how we actually test certain areas like access, like firewalls, like let's say change management. How do we go about that? So without the concepts, getting into that would be really difficult. So it's going to be a mix of certain theoretical concepts where I'm going to take you through, slides and text and all, and then it's also going to involve, a lot of practical aspects where I want to basically show you. Let's say if we talk about firewall, what exactly it looks like, right? Maybe not at a very advanced level, but at least at a basic level, what it looks like. When you talk about access controls, how is access actually managed, let's say in an operating system, right? In Windows or in Linux, for example. So that's going to be how the course is going to be structured. Uh, for today, the sessions are going to be around more around theory, because today is the first day. So I want to take you through concepts around IT audit, IS audit rather, I would say, and what exactly goes into IS audit. And always when I take trainings, my point has always been simple. Please make it interactive. If you have any queries, do not hesitate to ask. See, we have a smaller, number of people is, uh, let's say less than 10. And because of that, it's much easier for you guys to, just raise your hand, ask any questions, how do I say, share your thoughts. And I'm also going to keep some time towards the end to basically answer any questions that you have. So if you feel you don't want to ask during the session, you want to ask later, just keep that in mind as well. You can keep your question, note down your questions, and I will keep somewhere around 30 minutes towards the end, so that we can just go through questions. And do not hesitate to ask. No, see, in a training, the first point that I make to my audience is no question is
There's
stupid.
no one in your contacts named training. Whose contact info are you looking for?
Yeah. Okay. See, we have the LLMs at work already. But my only point is like, no questions are stupid. No, because this is a training, we are learning. So do not think of, what will others think if I ask this question. Please do not have any such thoughts. If you have any questions, do ask. Here, this is learning. We are learning from learning along with each other. And my objective is basically to ensure that you guys, by the end of this course, you can confidently say, yes, I know about IS audit. I know, in terms of how to understand controls, how to test, basic controls, and basically how to, I would say, understand the concepts around, answer questions around IS audit. I would say in very simple words, right? I'm going to turn off my video now and share slides. So just give me a sec. Okay. So let's start with something simple. I would just like to have icebreaker activity. So if the participants can just let us know their names, right? A fun fact about themselves, and also one thing that you're looking to get out of the course. So let me start with myself, right? My name is Taha Hussain. I have almost 20 years of experience in the information or IT audit domain. I am a chartered accountant and a certified information systems auditor. I'm also a high trust certified professional. And primarily, I was associated with Deloitte for almost 23 years, 24 years of my career, post which I basically wanted to explore the markets, and I'm currently doing freelancing. That's about me. Fun fact, apart from being a gadget freak, I also love novels, especially fiction, with thrillers or rom-coms. So I love reading books. Yep, that's a nice breaker activity about me. So guys, if you can, one of you can take the initiative and start.
Okay, I can go.
Sure.
My name is Sukumaran. For short, can call me Sugu. I also have many years of working experience in the telco industry, more than 30 years. I have retired, and then basically, instead of staying at home and idling myself, I decided to, I traveled quite a bit. In fact, I'm now based in Singapore, and I've traveled India, and then decided that instead of staying at home, do something, and that's why I wanted to do the auditing part of it. I've started doing auditing, so that's about myself. More than 30 plus years. The fun fact about myself is that I like to travel and visit places and meet people, whenever I have a chance. Okay, that's why I felt that auditing is a good job when you're dealing with people.
Yes.
And then what I need is more the hands-on experience. Okay, I understand the controls, and then making sure I'm doing the right thing, and also following the steps that's needed from the start of the audit itself. So that experience I'm hoping to get from here. Okay, that's about myself. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yep. So we'll, as you said, this is going to cover practical, the theory aspects, as well as hands-on experience as well, in terms of how you can go about at least testing some of the controls, right? So it's definitely that's also going to be there as part of this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So here I'm Balaji here. So I have 1 year of experience in security assurance, like as an IT audit, the basics I'm doing now. So the fun fact is I used to travel more. I like to travel, and I want to know the basic understandings or the practical understandings of the audit.
Great. Thanks so much, Balaji. Yes.
Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Anshu. Having like 10 plus years of experience taking care of the like security postures, enhancing, designing, checking doing the gap assessment. I'm a lead implementer of ISO 27000 also, plus certified CISA, but I'm looking from this course like a more practical experience, how to do audits for information systems. At the same time, I also love to travel, and I traveled a lot because whenever I get time, this is like like my stress tester. So if I'm free, I love to travel. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anshul. We have a lot of travel buffs today with us. Yeah.
I'm a shopaholic also, being a female. So
No, no.
that's
So
another part. Yeah.
I am also a shopaholic, but it is more in terms of gadgets. If there's a new gadget on the market, I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much, Anshul.
Okay.
Yes. Let me stop sharing for a minute. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Mona. I'm working in music channel and I working in IT service desk for more than 5 years. But in this channel, we start to work in audit. So I got the lead associate for audit. But my manager advised me to get this course. It will help me how to make a proper report of the audits and all the assets in the company, including license, include any issues we are facing, any missing items. He told me I will be more professional in the audit. So I'm interested to start with you, and he recommended you. He said you are the best here to get this information and learn more. Uh, I like swimming too much, and today I'm going to a new place. I'm shifting in the same time you are talking. So I'm little busy, but I will focus, inshallah, 100% as I can. And I like not traveling, I like discovering new places. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mona, for sharing. And definitely, we will. Uh, I know a lot of you have now said that you are. Some of you, already have experience and you're looking for practical aspects. So definitely, that is going to be on the agenda. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Who's left?
Hi, myself is Pramod Singh. I am a chartered accountant by education and internal auditor by profession. And I love to travel and trek. And from this course, definitely I want to learn the practical exposure. Beside CA, I am also ISO 27001 lead auditor. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pramod. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Kamya. So basically, I'm a chartered accountant and I'm working with Deloitte and Risk Advisory for 4.5 years now. So I am working on IT audits. So the thing that I was looking forward to this course was like getting an hands-on experience on what to expect to complete my CISA because I am desirous of completing CISA. Thank you.
Thanks, Kamya. Okay.
Hello,
Yeah.
hello,
Hi.
sir. This is Archana Naik, and I'm having 6 years of experience in operational role. But now I have reached a point where I want to transition from simply executing a process to a strategic contributor. So that's why I'm choosing Information System Audit and Assurance, this program. Uh, So I want to explore new things. I want to learn what is audit, how it has been implementing. That's it. So,
Thanks a lot, Archana. So I guess that covers everyone. Okay. So thank you so much, all of you, for sharing about yourself and your expectations. So I know overwhelmingly, I guess everybody has said they are looking more at how the practical aspects of it. So for today, we have more around theory because again, this is the first session, and I want to basically take you all through basics in terms of the fundamentals, at least from an IS audit perspective. We will also be covering certain aspects in terms of how do I say, not practical scenarios, but more in terms of case studies. I'll be asking you certain questions in terms of how to identify IT controls, why is it relevant. So we're going to cover those aspects today, and going forward. Uh, yep. If someone raised their hand.
So I wanted to check, Mr. Taha, is that is it possible to have those presentation slide in advance so that we can write our notes in there? Is there a possibility?
No, generally we don't give it in advance as such, Suku, but I'll just check with Deepti. But generally, I do not share in advance because then, uh, it's basically I just would like to take the flow, and I keep on also modifying certain things basis, my feedback that I get from you guys, right? So, but
Yep.
definitely this we can, I can share it. That's right.
Yeah. So if you can share then, because when we have the slides, then we can write our pointers in there itself. So I would appreciate speak to Dipti and then advise us. I hope the others will support that also. Thanks.
Sure. So, Suku, maybe let me discuss with Deepti. May not
Yeah.
be possible this week, but let me discuss with Deepti, and I'll see how we can,
Okay.
do it.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let me share my screen now. Is correct. Yeah. I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
yes, sir, it's visible.
Thanks. Okay, so these are going to be the learning objectives, right? I know we discussed this during our webinar as well. So it's more around IT concepts, overview of IT tools, techniques, and standards, right? Career pathways as well. We're going to look at enabling of performing IT audits independently, uh, and also basically foundation for obtaining certifications. So that's going to be the objective. Um, so these are the topics that we're going to cover. I know for a few of you, this would be, you would, as let's say chartered accountants or somebody who's already been in the risk advisory or in the IT field, some of these topics may seem repetitive to you, but at least bear with me because these are topics that are going to basically, how do I say, lay the foundation for us to basically enable us to do the practical testing later, right? And I'm going to link when we actually do the practical parts later. I'm going to link this. So for today, we are going to be covering, sorry. Today we're going to be covering up to the planning considerations to, the identification of IT controls. Then balance you will be doing tomorrow, and practical also we'll start baking in from tomorrow onwards. So these are going to be certain areas that we're going to be covered very specifically in terms of practical exposure, auditing, server security, Active Directory, firewalls, patch management, right? Policy and process, how to basically look at policy and processes. We'll also look at certain cloud-related controls if we can cover those for AWS, and also maybe look at certain SOC reports, how SOC reports, what are SOC reports, how they work, because these are the most common. See, again, we had 2 to 3 participants who are already ISO lead auditors, right? So those are also areas where I would say in today's world, considering the pervasiveness of IT, we basically have a lot of reporting requirements around IT controls, right? Or rather, I would say controls. IT controls is a subset. So I'll just, okay, let me start with, what is an IS audit? Let me just start from the beginning, right? An IS audit is basically an independent examination, right, of an organization's information systems. Now, how did this term and all come into being? When you talk about information systems, infrastructure, operations, right? Where does it all come from? Why is this needed in the first place? And the most important question which comes for most of the auditors is, what do I need to actually cover? Okay, I guess. So the question here is, the point here, what I was trying to say is, one aspect of it is what exactly do we cover when we talk about IT audit, right? An organization uses multiple IT systems. In today's world, when you look at, when you take any organization, even let's say take a simple at home, right? At home, we might be using, let's say, a Wi-Fi router, right, for internet. Then we might be using a smart device like an Alexa or a Google or a Apple, right? Then we might be using our telephones, which might have, let's say, assistants. Then we might also be using certain other devices, smart devices as we call them, right, which will respond to voice commands. Now, what devices we have? CCTVs, right, which allow you to see remotely. Now, I'm taking an example of a home because I'm just trying to see how pervasive IT is in today's environment. Similarly, when you go to an organization, right, any organization, it could be a manufacturing organization, it could be a service organization. IT is pervasive in almost all of the processes today. When I say pervasive, right from you entering the premises, right, you have your biometric or you have your access card security, right? From there, you have visitor capturing, right? You have, let's say, vehicle entry. Then you have your CCTVs. Then you have, let's say, operational systems like if it's a manufacturing organization, your floor, I would say the machine floor systems, the PLCs, process level controllers, right? Then you will have your ERPs, which will basically capture your purchases, your sales, your material planning, uh, your budgeting, payroll, treasury. So all those operations, right? Human resources. Similarly, for a service organization, you might have software which captures time, which captures your work, which captures messaging like Teams or Slack, right? You might have software which captures uh, your Jira or GitHub, right? Which basically captures your development. So you have a lot of IT systems which are pervasive across organizations. Now, from an IT IS audit perspective, what exactly do you cover, right? What is needed in the sense, what exactly should be in scope? What should I consider when I want to do an IT audit? So those are certain aspects that we are going to be discussing today. That's basically our, how do I say it, topic, or that's going to be our area of focus for today, that is around planning, right? So when you talk about an IS audit, we basically say, okay, fine, we're looking at information systems, infrastructure, operations, and what are those objectives of that particular audit? It's primarily around confidentiality, whether it's keeping data confidential, right? Integrity. So if, let's say, data is going in, you all heard about the concept of GIGO, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So whatever data goes in, does it come out the way that it is intended to come out, or does it get changed, right? And all that is basically done through controls. Availability. Are the systems available on time? Are the reports available in real time? If I run a report now for something, is it giving me data which is as of now, or which is basically from a past date? So those are certain aspects. Compliance, right? Does the system comply with laws? Am I basically, let's say in India, there is a requirement for backups to be local. Local, when I say local, basically they have to be, a copy of the backups have to be maintained in India. Then there is another requirement for audit logs. All accounting systems in India have to have audit logs, right? So am I complying with those requirements? So basically that is the primary objective of an IT or an IS audit, right? And what do auditors evaluate? So basically, as an auditor, when you say, okay, fine, I'm required to do an IS audit, right? I'm required to look at certain aspects. What exactly am I required to evaluate? Fine, I know I'm going to cover, let's say, the ERP. I'm going to cover, let's say, the operational system, right? I'm going to cover the time management, or I'm going to cover payroll. What exactly am I going to see there, right? So, one is, of course, the IT governance, because that starts from the top, the tone at the top. We'll expand on that, in the next slides. IT governance and risk management frameworks, security controls. The primary objective of doing an IS audit is security, right? And so security is basically the most important aspect or most important area which is looked at. Then, of course, you have data backup, disaster recoveries, change management, nothing but system development and change management, right? Business continuity planning. Typically, when you look at IS audit, right, business continuity doesn't, or how to put it, basically, from a audit process, an audit always is done for something which has already happened, right? An audit is a current state assessment of a transaction which has already happened in the past. In simple words, that's what an audit is. A lot of times, when you look at audits, auditors will say, okay, I'm going to give a report which is only going to be valid for the period which is already gone, right? One example I will give is, contradictory example to that is ISO. An ISO certification is given for an audit which is, let's say, done today, but which says that it is valid for, let's say, the next 3 years, but it is again subject to a audit done in between, in the sense, sorry, I'm not able to get the term, but basically the audit which is done in between, right? Every year, an audit is also required, further audit is required to be done to understand whether the controls are still the same or there is a change. So please keep in mind, audit is always something which is done for a period which is past, right? And it is going to be a report. Audit reports are always going to be issued for periods which have already happened or occurred. You cannot issue an audit report for a current date, rather, you cannot issue an audit report today for a period, let's say 1st January to 31st December, right? It will always be, let's say, after the audit is done. That is the reason when you look at financial statements, the financial statements come out after the period is ended, right? So let's say it's 31st December or 31st March. So same concept applies for an IS audit as well. Now, how does business continuity come into being? Business continuity is looked at where to just assess whether, as an organization, are you prepared? Let's say if there was some disruption in the future, are you prepared to address that disruption? Okay, is there going to be if there is a financial impact? See, at the end of the day, why is all this done? Right? It is all for assessing whether there will be either a financial impact or a regulatory impact. Trust me, most of the organizations in the world do compliance or do audits just for these two. One is a financial impact, another is a compliance impact. If today there were no laws or regulations, trust me, nobody would get an audit done, or rather, very few organizations in the world would get an audit done, right? So, as we used to say when I was in Deloitte, compliance is basically what makes consultants money, right? But coming back to the practical aspects, it's basically an audit is typically looked at where it's going to have an impact either on my financials or on my compliance. And considering that, you have the last part where you have regulatory compliance as well. If it's going to be if it's required as per GDPR, or if it's required as per SOX, or required as per HIPAA, or if you're in India, let's say if you're required as per IFC, that's internal financial controls as well, right? But of course, because as an auditor, if you're doing audit, for example, then what is the value that you're delivering, right? Yeah, is there a possibility that an IS auditor can deliver value? So you have to get an audit done. As an organization, they have to get an IT audit done, for example. But as an auditor, when you come in, is there a way where you can deliver value to them, right? Is there any suggestions that you can make which will help improve the process? Is there any areas that you can identify which will basically help the organization either save cost or save time or save efforts for that matter, right? Do you identify areas which, let's say, are high risk, could have let the organization into either a cyber episode or some other impact. But because of you as an auditor identifying that, basically they are able to mitigate or avoid that particular risk. So that mindset, an auditor, see, if you just go with a simple audit mindset, say I'm going to look, I have this control, I'm just going to look at this control, I'm going to test and say yes or no. Yeah, that's basically what you are required to do. But if you want to be recognized in terms of, you want to be valued as an IS auditor, then you'll also have to be mindful of the fact and look at opportunities where you can help an organization create value or add value to their IT processes or IS processes for that matter, right? So when you say, again, if you see here, vulnerabilities, recommends improvements, ensures operational reliability, and also provides assurance to stakeholders that information assets are properly safeguarded. So, this, apart from being the audit objective, it's a value add as well for an organization. If you tell them, look, although I have done the audit, this is the additional aspects that I can help you with. Sorry, just give me a sec. Okay, I'll just come to a brief history of where all this came from. When you're looking at ISO, you're looking at SOX, you're looking at SOC, SOC, you're looking at, let's say, ICFR, that's basically financial audit, or a normal IT audit in an organization. Where did all this come from? So basically in the US, right? See, US is the biggest, I would say, market in terms of the stock market, rather, right? It's the largest stock market in the world, basically. Or if somebody wants to raise money, or somebody wants to, that's one of the biggest market. That's the biggest market in the world. So somewhere in the late or the beginning of, I would say, late 90s or beginning of 2000, there was an organization called Enron. Some of you might have already heard about it, but basically there was a major scandal which basically I would say Enron fudged their books, right, books of accounts, to basically park their losses somewhere else and show to the entire, I would say, when an organization is basically publishing their accounts, they were publishing saying that they have a lot of profits, their stock prices were very high, executives are getting good bonuses and all. And suddenly one fine day, the bubble burst. Someone did an investigation and they realized that, there were a lot of losses, but that were not actually being shown in the books of account because of some financial, I would say, irregularities, or you can say, creative accounting, whatever it is at that particular point of time. Because of this, there was a huge UN cry, and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US was basically enacted somewhere in 2002. Now, what that did was basically that set up something called as the PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, and it also mandated basically the signing, or rather I would say attestation of the internal controls over financial reporting, ICFR. Now that's where most of the, before, it's not that before that ISO was not there or this was not done, but controls were looked at, but they were more looked at from a standpoint of, okay, if there is a process, do I have a control? Is this control working? Okay, is it designed and operating? Fine. Control design and control testing and all has been there since ages. It's been there since hundreds of years. It's not like, it came up after the ICFR or after IT audits and all. Control testing has been there since hundreds of years. Right when audit started, control testing also has been there, because controls have been there since ancient times. For each and everything, we basically have controls in place. Now, the SOX, what it did is mandated the organization, in the sense the CEO and the CFO, to sign off on the financial statement saying the organization has a robust internal control framework. And also it required the auditors to verify that framework, and basis that verification of the framework, sign off on the give a report saying, or sign off, right, saying that the framework is, the controls are designed and operating effectively, and basically lay down penalties saying if there's a wrong incorrect attestation, or a wrong attestation, or a fraudulent attestation, then there will be either financial or criminal penalties. And because of that, the PCOB was set up, and the PCOB mandated certain requirements of how a control framework right? How an organization should have a control framework. So they basically say, I'm just going back to the history lesson to give some context, right? And how it is relevant today in terms of what IT testing we actually do. So the PCAOB laid down saying that, all organizations should basically have follow a controls framework. At that time, there was a framework called COSO, Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, and that was a recommended framework in the sense, because that was something which all the industry leaders had come together to basically set up, saying this is how we're going to have uh, this is how a control environment should be, right? They wanted to basically set up saying, uh, else what used to happen was everyone had their own way of looking at controls, or everyone had their own way of saying, okay, for me this is a control, whereas somebody else would say, no, I'll look at a control in this particular way, I'll document it like this, somebody else document it in a different way. So there was no consistency earlier. So the PCOB came up and said, follow a controls framework which is consistent and which is global, and hence the COSO framework was used by was adopted by the organizations, most of the organizations globally, I would say, which basically laid a set framework as to how controls identification should be done, how a control activity should be defined, how risks should be defined, and finally how the monitoring of those controls should be done. So basis that, uh, organizations started basically developing their control environment or documenting the control environment. And the PCOB mandated that all organizations should, one, have a process narrative in terms of written process description. So for each process, there has to be something in writing, right? Either an SOP or a process document. Then they mandated a flowchart also to be available. And thirdly, they said all organizations should have something called as a risk and controls matrix. Until today, right? All of these three are used across the globe when it comes to documenting of controls. The same also goes for IT audit, where you do have an SOP. There are flowcharts which are prepared, and of course, the risk and control matrix is what we use to actually test and document our IS or IT controls. Now, how is that relevant? How did the IT or information security come into being? Now, what happened was at that particular point of time, there was an outsourcing boom going on, right? You'd have seen the Cognizants and the Wipros and the Infys of the world basically had started their operations at that time, and they were doing a lot of outsourcing in terms of the business processes. Certain IT processes were also being outsourced. And because of that, it was, how do I say, when it came into IT, right? The cloud and all was not there, but at that time, a lot of ERPs were basically gaining traction, right? Like SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards, and those ERPs were starting to become mainstream. And organizations realized that, traditionally, most of the controls used to be around financial areas, whether, a journal entry is being approved and, or rather, I would say verified and approved, reviewed, right? Similarly, where a payroll is processed correctly. So these are certain, typical financial controls, which organizations used to test. Now they realize that, because data is being processed through an IT system, the way they look at controls, right? Traditional way of looking at controls had to change. In the sense, see, although I may do my payroll processing through an IT system, fine, payroll process through an IT system, that control still remains the same. Whether my payroll is processed completely or accurately, that still remains the same. But an IT system introduced a new level of complexity, because IT also had their own set of, I would say, processes like change management, like access. If somebody could get unauthorized access, they could influence the way the payroll was processed. If somebody could do an unauthorized change, they could basically do, some fraudulent entries in the payroll system, and which in turn would have a financial impact. So then, the organization started looking at, okay, how do we assess IT controls? Because again, the COSO framework, as I said, was very generic. It was an organization specific thing. So then basically the COBIT came, or rather COBIT started becoming mainstream, where COBIT basically is more of an IT framework, and it defines the areas which typically should be covered under any specific IT audit. So considering COBIT, organizations started, drafting, or rather I would say designing their IT controls and designing their IT processes around those particular areas. And this is where basically the IT audit or IS audit came into being. Now, India also had its own moment, I would say, where we had a scam for an organization called Satyam. And basically what happened there was they changed certain code in the backend, where if, let's say, somebody tried to generate a report, if it was, let's say, done by an X user, then the output would be different. But if it was done by, let's say, user Y, then the output actually would come out differently, right? It allowed certain users to go and make unauthorized modifications from the back end directly, in the sense, make unauthorized modifications, which, and because of the way IT controls were looked at, that was not something which was easily uh, caught or easily basically identified by the auditors. So because of that, when all this came out, in India also there was a lot of focus on IT controls in terms of how do organizations become ready for, make themselves ready for understanding whether they uh, comply with the IT requirements, or are they basically, are they in line with the global baselines when it comes to IT controls. So this is where basically the IS audits started becoming mainstream. Today, when we look at IS audit, basically it is very matured, and you have a lot of documentation, you have a lot of industry baselines in terms of how control should be drafted, how the risks should be identified. So that's basically a brief history of how we came, how the IS audit, the IT audit basically became mainstream. So before I move into a life cycle of an audit, any questions up to this point? Okay. Now we've looked at basically what is an IS audit and what is the how do I say, background for an IS audit. Now let's see if what is the life cycle of a typical IS audit, right? If let's say I want to do an information security audit, sorry, what is the typical life cycle, or how should I go about actually doing an IS audit? So there are typically three phases. One is your planning phase, right? Second is the field work, and third is basically the reporting and follow-up. Here I would like to say, the planning phase, when it comes to work, see, this is more of a practical real world exam or real world experience that I'm sharing, right? The planning phase, although it is the most critical, unfortunately we tend to spend lesser time on planning, right? More time on field work. And of course, reporting is, once you do the field work, you basically come to the reporting part. But if your planning is done right, then trust me, your fieldwork actually becomes much, much more simpler, right? And if your fieldwork is easier, you will be able to add more value to the client and identify, your reporting part also becomes easy. A lot of times when, let's say, we were doing an audit, which is since years, right? In those scenarios, we basically used to have, like, let's say I have, I had 3 systems in scope last year. Okay, in the current year, we use just do a simple inquiry. Oh, is there a change? Oh, there is no change. Let's proceed. Let's use the same control templates and do the testing. Very rare cases we used to, I would not say rare cases, but unless and until there was something major, we used to say, like, okay, fine, there's nothing, no major changes. Let's just proceed as is. I would just caution against that, because it's not that it's a bad approach. I would just caution because, IT is a field which basically is very dynamic. There is a lot of change in terms of technology which happens on a continuous basis. There is a lot of change which happens in terms of threat analysis or threats or vulnerabilities on a continuous basis. And because of that, there is a lot of change in the risks also, right? 2 years back, people used to say if you have MFA, multi-factor authentication, you're really secure. Today, trust me, there are ways to bypass MFA, right? And they are actually becoming mainstream. Organizations are now looking at different ways of saying, okay, is there a much more secure way than actually multi-factor authentication, right? That's how it has become today. So, for especially in an IT audit, we have to be mindful of, at the planning stage in terms of what changes are happening, and basically, am I scoping in the right systems, right? So today's objective, or rather, today's focus is going to be primarily around the planning phase. What basically should be considered, how a planning of an audit should be done, right? What all aspects should be considered in when we are planning an audit? What are typically risks associated with a particular process or a control, and what are risks, to IT systems, risks associated with an IT system, right? So that is going to be the focus of today's session, right? That's the reason I said it's going to be a little more practical, but still I'm going to ask you a lot of questions around, how a scoping should be done. Let's say I'm going to ask you to explain what exactly, let's say if this is a particular system, what should you scope in, right? So that is certain aspects that we're going to look at. Uh, Again, so what are the key planning considerations, right? So why does planning matter? The first thing is, planning ensures effectiveness, efficiency, and addresses the right risks. When I talk about effectiveness and efficiency, a lot of times what happens is, if you do not plan it right, or if the phases are not done right, I'm telling you practical examples, you'll end up testing the same uh, evidences again and again, and that is going to, you know, frustrate your auditing. A lot of times you go and ask, okay, give me, let's say, a list of changes, give me this particular samples for, let's say, changes. Then in some other control you come across changes, you go and say, okay, give me a few more samples around changes. Then again, in another phase you come across certain control where you again go and ask. So the client is going to be frustrated, because they're going to say, guys, you are already asking me the same data across multiple controls, across multiple areas, across multiple people. Can that be optimized, or can it be made more effective? See, here it is not about uh, the number of samples, it is more in terms of how you approach, or how the scoping is done, or how effective, uh, or how effective the considerations are going to be, right? How effective the control optimization is going to be, right? How to identify systems so that you don't have overlapping requirements, or you don't have overlapping requests to the client again and again for the same thing. So those are certain considerations that we need to keep in mind, right? When it comes to efficiency, rather, I would say, right, and the right risks in an audit. Sorry, my apologies. I'm having a little cough, so it's. Uh, just give me 1 second. Just have a sip of water. Okay. So when you talk about efficiency and addressing the right risks, as I was mentioning in the beginning, right, IT is pervasive. So, if you start looking at each and every system in an organization, that's not going to get you anywhere, because there may be certain systems which may be relevant from, let's say, an operational or a financial standpoint, and there may be systems which, let's say, are uh, basically not so relevant, or not so important, or not so material, right? Uh, Simple example I'm going to give is, take an example of a biometric system. If, let's say, the biometric system is used just to gain an entrance, right, but not capture attendance, would it be relevant from a, let's say, manufacturing company point of view? I'm not talking about a service organization here. Let's say I'm talking more about manufacturing, where you have a security guard, right, who's looking at the IDs, and then you have a biometric system in place, correct, which is basically just used to authenticate somebody going into the onto the floor. So would that biometric system be useful, or should it be considered from from an audit perspective? I want to hear any thoughts from any of you.
I can try. If that area is secured, I believe you have to have the access, whether the person is able to access to the location. But probably if he has no access, he will be denied access.
Fair enough. See, that's the purpose, right, of the biometric system.
Hmm.
It's basically whether I allow or don't allow, right?
Hmm.
My question here is it relevant from an audit perspective to me? Let's say somebody says, I don't use this biometric data for capturing attendance, right? I have an attendance register which is signed separately on the floor. This biometric is just to authenticate somebody entering the premises. Would it be relevant for me from a test, or rather from my scoping perspective, whether should I include that particular system?
From scope point of view, then I would say no.
Okay. That's a good point, but I'll flip it now. I'll say that biometric is basically used for access to a server room. Would it be relevant then?
Yeah, then definitely be relevant. That's why I said whether earlier I mentioned it depends on the security requirements, whether the room is a secure place that there's restriction of who can access.
Absolutely.
So biometric access is important.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So thanks so much for that. See, again, in an audit, right? If I ask such a question, the answer always is depends. That is an unfortunate curse of the auditor, because for each and every scope or each and every area that is supposed to be done, it always depends. There is no right or wrong from an audit standpoint, right? It is always depends, because if you ask me for this particular process, should I include this system? It depends. Why does it depend? It depends on basically the coverage, the scope, right? And basically what impact does it have? And hence, a biometric system maybe just at a reception area where just allowing people to get into the office, but no attendance capturing, may not be relevant from an audit standpoint. But let's say if it's at a server room, the same system installed at a server room, which is basically ensuring that only authorized people get access to that particular server room. Yes, in that scenario, it will become relevant. But then when I'm doing the testing, should I test the entire system or only specific to that server? The next question would be is it possible to do that segregation in the first place, right? Will I be able to, let's say, only test a part of the system rather than the whole system? And if I want to test this particular system, do I look at all the controls, or do I only look at a few of the important controls, right? Whether all controls carry a risk or only a few controls carry a risk, which I should consider. So these are certain considerations when you do a planning. Now, a lot of you, right? I would say most of you are aware of IT concepts, right? You've looked at, access controls, change management, backups, right? Network operations, data center, physical security, logical security. So the question here would come is, for a biometric system, would I need to look at physical security for wherever it is stored, whichever server it is stored on? Do I need to look at, let's say, data backup for a biometric system? Do I need to look at BCP for a biometric system? Right? Again, it depends. So as an auditor, when you are doing your planning, you have to have these, or rather consider these factors, right? Sorry, I'll just present my screen again. You have to consider these factors when you're doing your planning. You may say, okay, I will look at only a specific set of controls. I may only want to, let's say, look at controls around change management, right? Or let's say controls around privilege access to the biometric application. I may not want to look at any other controls at all. Why? Because those aspects may not be relevant. So, I am just trying to highlight here that when you do a planning, it is very, very important to identify your areas of testing, your areas of focus, the controls actually that you're going to test, right? The people that you're going to speak to, and at the locations that you're going to cover, right? Those are very, very critical when basically you're doing your considerations around planning. Now, what all basically is involved when you want to do planning? What all should you be looking at? One is, of course, understanding the business, right? What industry is it in? Again, the reason when I mentioned manufacturing and services, the reason there is being from a manufacturing standpoint, right? The way I look at IT controls would be a little different from the way I look at controls in a service organization, right? In a service organization, for me, how the process is done, basically time management. If let's say I'm doing controls for my customers, those customer controls, those all might be relevant from a service organization standpoint. But from a manufacturing organization standpoint, what would be more relevant is in terms of the operational software, let's say software which captures my production, my inventory, right? Then my ERPs, software which is basically doing my entire end-to-end financial reporting and management for me, right? Right from my purchase requisition to my PO. So those aspects need to be considered, or rather, your understanding of the industry, the operations, right? The org structure as well. We have seen practical scenarios where, let's say, an organization has multiple divisions, right? And each division actually uses different ERPs. Okay, I have seen that also happening. And when you basically look at how the overall IT is structured, it is basically, I would say, I would not say unstructured, but then it is scattered, right? Because everybody is their own silo. So if let's say one division uses SAP, another division is using Dynamics, for example, a third division has its own bespoke ERP. Okay, in those scenarios, your planning considerations will differ because your efforts go up, right? You have to test controls independently at all the three locations or all the three divisions. But let's say you have a organization which is having one ERP across multiple divisions, right? And because of that particular aspect, the control environment is the same. See, although I may have this division may have its own people coming in or going, this division may have its own set of, let's say, controls around operations or financial processes. But when it comes to IT, when it comes to access, or when it comes to change management, the process, let's say, remains the same, right? I'm just going into more in terms of how do we do testing, but it is very important in terms of scoping as well. That if my processes are the same across the organization, irrespective of the divisions, then when I do my planning, at least I can optimize it in such a way that I don't end up either doing oversampling or doing over audit, because that is just going to be a waste of my effort as an auditor, right? And that aspect is very, very critical when you are actually doing your planning. You have to understand, see, if you don't do that during your planning stage, and when you actually doing your testing and you get it, and you realize that, oh, okay, the processes are the same, I could have done it like this, you again have to go back to the drawing board, again have to basically remap your, let's say, controls or your sample sizes, and then, remap your risks. And then basically, I would say it's just a headache in terms of redocumenting the whole thing again, practically. So at the time of planning, all these aspects, right, in terms of commonality of the business processes, structure, in terms of different ERPs or different systems being used, is very, very critical. The second aspect is risk assessment, right? We were just discussing on biometrics. As I said, for a person who's just passing through the reception, my risk is very low. But for a server room, my risk is very high. And that is where risk assessment comes in. Risk assessment allows an auditor to basically focus on the controls that they really want to test, and they really want to basically put more efforts on. So for example, those who have already, let's say, done certain testing or who are doing certain IT audit testing, privileged access is given more consideration. Privileged access review, rather, is given more consideration than a normal standard user access review. Why does that happen? Because a standard user may be able to, let's say, do a transaction or the risk they carry is only for their own area of expertise or or area of business. Whereas a privileged user will be able to impact all the areas, rather all the processes, I would say, in a particular organization because of them having privileged access, right? And there, the risk that you attribute to that particular control has to be higher when compared to, let's say, the risk that you attribute to a control which is, let's say, impacting a very specific area or whose financial impact is negligible. One aspect I want to say is when we do scoping, right, may not be relevant from an IT audit perspective, but just as a background, is that uh, let's say, especially for SOX, the questions a lot of you would basically, when you do IT audit, you will basically be given by the list of applications saying, this is the list of applications, this is the list of controls. Please test and give us, let us know whether it is, designed or operating effectively, right? The question which comes is, how did the list of applications come in? What were the considerations which went behind it? And can you as an IS auditor add any value to it? Right? Can you contribute something to it? So one thing, or rather, two things that you can do is, one is be part of the planning discussions with the main operational teams. See, at the end of when IT audit is typically being done for an organization, it's either done as a subset of, let's say, the overall audit. It could be either internal audit, it could be either management testing for SOX, it could be either how do I say, a normal audit. Let's say when an auditor is basically coming in and you're doing an audit, right? So this could be the consideration that, or rather the involvement of the IT audit function, and they are only basically called in to test a specific area, saying, okay, these are the applications, these are the controls, and please test. Is there a way where you can add value? You can be part of those particular discussions when I can ask the operational teams when the actual discussion is happening, either the internal audit team or your management testing team or whoever it is, right, to basically involve you also in the discussion, right? So that you get an understanding of why certain systems are basically being included. And also one aspect that we used to look at is, for any financial operation, you have something called as a trial balance, or you have a financial statements, right? The financial statements are basically comprising of something called as a trial balance, a balance sheet, and a profit and loss account. So trial balance is the base. It basically says, all your ledgers in say for non-audit or non-CA guys. I'm just saying in very simple words, it's basically a ledger is the transactions that you do, right? And for all those transactions are summarized in something called as a trial balance. And that trial balance at the end of the day gets summarized into your statements that you see published in the newspapers, right? So at the trial balance level, an assessment is done whether, from an organization standpoint, if my sales is 100 crores, right, and my scrap sale is, let's say, 50 lakhs, and my normal sale 95 crores 50 lakhs is, let's say, happening through an ERP X, whereas the sales of 50 lakhs for scrap sales is happening through ERP Y. Will I consider that ERP Y as well from a scrap sales standpoint? Do I need to consider it? Right? And that is something where the concept of materiality comes in. Right? It is not very critical for us as IT auditors because we typically look at processes and controls, so we don't get into materiality considerations. But then that is relevant because only if a transaction or a system or an operation is material is that considered from an audit standpoint. And only for those particular operational aspects or financial aspects do we look at the corresponding IT systems or IT environment. So a long story, I just digressed or basically went into the history. But the point is that try to get involved in your scoping at an organization level when the scoping is happening. Try to get involved there, at least try to get an understanding in terms of why certain systems have been scoped in. And also, when you scope in, let's say, a primary system, you also need to understand what secondary systems need to be considered. And now, what do I mean by this? So let's say my primary system is SAP, for example. I hope most of you would have heard about SAP, right? So it is one of the, I would say, foremost ERPs on the planet. and most of the organizations across the globe use it. Of course, you have Oracle, you have Microsoft Dynamics as well. To a lesser extent, you have in India we have something called as Tally, which is technically not an ERP, but then that's also an accounting system which is used, right? You have Zoho Books. So an ERP basically is an end-to-end system. And let's say when you are looking at an ERP, IT controls for an ERP, you have various areas that you would cover. You would, let's say, have change management or access management. But those change management or access management, whatever, is happening, let's say, through a ticketing system. And all my approvals are happening through the ticketing system. So in that scenario, would this ticketing system be relevant? Or should it be included, let's say, in your IT testing? So this question I'm actually throwing to the group. So let me stop sharing for a minute. So can anyone tell me, let's say if I have an ERP system for which an access control or a change management is happening through a ticketing system and all my approvals and everything is being captured through there, do I need to test the ticketing system as well? Anyone?
So, this one, the ticketing system, you want to check on the access control matrix, whether it is, the background is noisy.
Mona, would it be possible to mute? Yeah, thank you so much.
So my view is that, yes, you have to, because one is to check on the access control, whether the matrix has been established, is meeting the matrix. And as you mentioned earlier, the privilege access also need to be reviewed as a priority, you know, and whether the process is followed across. That's my answer.
Yes. So absolutely. So great way of putting it across. So the question here which comes is, how relevant is this ticketing system to place reliance on the controls in my ERP? Right. See, when you're doing your planning, the consideration that you're going to have in your mind in terms of when you look at whether should I include this particular system, should I not include this particular system, is whether what impact or what relevance that system has on the controls that you're actually going to test. So all of you agree that the primary system that you're going to test is going to be the SAP, right? That's the ERP. Now, for testing the ERP, some processes may be outsourced. For example, let's say my servers, right? Or my change management, let's say it's outsourced to a third party. Similarly, let's say if I want to create a new user, it happens through a ticketing system and all my approvals are happening through that system. So what I'm trying to say is when you're doing a planning consideration, you have to keep in mind not just your primary system, but also the connecting systems to the supporting systems to that primary system. So here, as Suku nicely put it, if basically my privileged access, my access management is happening through that, then in that case, right, if my ticketing system, let's say ticketing system is integrated with SAP, right, and when somebody raises a ticket for new access and the manager approves and the IT team approves, right, and that automatically then goes and basically creates the user in the ERP, then you will need to look at the ticketing system as well, because certain part of your processes, right, certain part of your risks are actually lying with the ticketing system as well. So a lot of times when basically you do your IT testing, you realize that, let's say Jira or a ServiceNow has also been actually included as part of your IT controls. But the question which is going to come is, do I need to look at the full spectrum of controls that need to be tested, or I just need to look at, let's say, certain specific controls? And I'm going to give my favorite answer, that depends, right? It depends, because to what extent is the integration done between the, let's say, ticketing system and the ERP? To what extent is the reliance being placed, right? And that is where the criticality, or rather, the judgment comes in. So you as IT or IS auditors, how to use your judgment to understand, right, whether this system is going to be critical, right? If I don't include this system, what is the risk that I'm going to run? And is that risk important? Is that risk something which I cannot do without? Or is that risk something which I can actually do without? If I cannot do without, then that system has to be tested. If I can live with that risk, then I need not test that particular system, or I need not include that particular system. Okay, so that's the whole. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Is that as part of the planning, you know, we are not going to do 100% of every control itself. So we want to be selective in the control to be tested because of the time constraint. And part of audit is sampling only. So is it okay? For example, I'm talking about ISO 27001. You want the controls you want to audit. So is it okay to share in advance to the client? You're saying that because of the time given, because today customer also want to restrict the number of days given to us as auditor. Maybe they say, okay, 2 days of auditing time given, and they are sharing the evidence. So can we say that, okay, we only do certain annex control, for example, organizational control and people's control, and the rest of it, if it's a surveillance audit, then the rest of it we do the following year. Is it a good practice, or is what is your thought on it?
So again, I'm going to say the same word. It depends. The reason it depends is because not that way. The reason it depends is because again, it's about the risk. See, ISO is something which is pretty standardized in terms of the controls, or rather the statements or the requirements that you're going to look at are codified, right? They're very, very specific, saying that, you know, if it's an ISMS, then the organization needs to have an ISMS, needs to have a risk assessment, for example. So what typically happens is, if I am doing the audit for the first time, right? Let's say it's the proper certification audit, not a surveillance one. If it's a certification audit, it applies for all, not just for ISO as well, right? If it's the main audit that I'm doing, then in that scenario, do I have the luxury of actually excluding something? Because I'm going to give a reliance, or I'm going to give a certificate on the process at an organization, right? So is there a possibility for me, or can I actually get away with not including something? And if the answer is no, because if I'm giving, let's say, if it's the first time that I'm doing, or if it's a full certification that I'm doing, and if it's something where if I exclude it, then, you know, I may not be able to reach the conclusion that I want to reach, then, you know, you will have to include it. But let's say if it's a surveillance audit, the client has told you in advance that I have not made any major changes, or I have not made any changes to my environment, right? In that case, you can say that, okay, I only want to look at, let's say, controls A, B, C, because those are high risk controls. For the rest, I will exclude, because I know that the client has not made any changes to their environment, and hence these controls are actually, or these controls are not going to change, right? And since my controls are not going to change, testing them is not going to add any value either to my how do I say, opinion, or to the client as well. So in those scenarios, I can actually skip, or I would say not skip, but I can exclude those controls from testing, or exclude those areas from testing. I hope that answers.
Yeah, okay, I got it. So I think one other factor to consider, like what you mentioned, is the risk assessment, where they reviewed it. They is expected to review annually. From there, you can see what are the controls to be reviewed. That is one way to determine the controls.
Absolutely. So see, the risk has two aspects, right? One is the risk assessment that the organization is doing. Great. So when we talk about risk assessment, you have organizations which do their own risk assessment, right? All organizations do the risk assessments. So they will basically identify their processes. They will say that, okay, these processes are high risk for me, these processes are low risk for me, right? Whereas you as an auditor, when you go in, you have a lot of industry experience in terms of looking at similar organizations or similar industries, right? Or different organizations, but let's say in the same having the same software. You have a lot of experience there. Now you will also try to use your judgment in terms of understanding whether the risk assessment is appropriate or not. If you find the client's risk assessment is appropriate, right? You looked at the risk assessment, you feel okay, what way they have done, the way they've identified, I am fine or satisfied with it. Then you can basically then concentrate on the areas where the client is themselves saying it's a high risk area. But if let's say you have a disconnect, you say the client is saying cyber risk is a low risk, for example, right? It's a rare case. I'm just giving an example, right? The client may say cyber risk is a low risk. Okay. But you may disagree because let's say the client is having a website or a portal through which they do a B2B. Maybe no, financial entries may not be happening, but at least orders are placed, other inventory is updated, let's say through that. In that scenario, you may still have your own judgment saying, okay, although the client has said it is a low risk item, for me as an auditor, it is a high risk item, and I want to include that. And here, our role as IS auditors is very, very critical, because expectation, right, is that you will be able to make your own judgment in terms of whether this risk is high or this risk is low, right? And that is where the differentiation happens. When you as an independent auditor, or you as an IS auditor, forget independent, you as an auditor, either at the organization level, because let's say if you're doing internally for an organization, the process teams have done a risk assessment and they've identified something as low. But when you as an IS auditor are testing it and you realize that the risk is high because there is a dependency on, let's say, some other process, or dependency on this process has a dependence, is basically some other process has a dependency on this, and if this does not work, then the other process actually may go down. So in that scenario, you will have to use your judgment to say, although it has been assessed as low by, let's say, the process owner or the organization, I as an IS auditor am going to assess it high, and hence put more focus on the testing for this particular application or this particular area. So that's something that is going to be a judgment call, and you have to be, as an IS auditor, you have to be on the lookout for it. I know for recurring things, it's easier to, let's say, take the last assessment, but as an auditor, you will need to be mindful in terms of has anything happened during the last year or the current year which is going to impact the risk assessment. Has the process owner considered, or has the process owner or the organization considered it? If they have considered it, well and good. If not, then you will have to consider it and take your own call and be able to justify it as well. Again, the second critical aspect is you may want to take a call, but if you're not able to justify it, then you're going to have a lot of fights on your hands. So you should have a rationale and justification also for the stand that you're taking. As an auditor, if you assess that I feel the risk is high because of ABC factors, then you should be able to justify it and basically provide that assurance to the business, saying that I am going to increase my audit scope because of this particular reason here for this particular application, and I want to reduce my audit scope for this reason for this particular application. Trust me, nobody likes change, especially if we go and tell an audit process owner that I want to see more controls or I want to get more evidences. The first reaction is going to be negative, right? All of you who have done an audit are aware of or conversant with what basically I'm saying. So that aspect is something which is not going to be easy. That conversations are going to be difficult, and hence the reason for saying that this should be done at the planning stage rather than the testing stage. If you're able to basically convince people at the planning stage itself, it's not easy. See, unless and until you understand or you look at certain transactions, you will not be able to make up your mind. But again, at least when you are having your initial set of discussions, ask the right set of questions. Be prepared with what you want to ask, right? Be prepared with what you want to understand. That's why I said when your process discussions are happening, irrespective of you are going as an auditor, you're going as a management tester, you're going as whatever capacity, if you are part of that discussion, you should also be ready with your own set of questions to understand, and that question will help you assess, okay, is this system going to be relevant or is this system not going to be relevant? And is this system going to be a high risk or is this system going to be a normal risk? So those are certain factors that will help you at the planning stage to basically optimize your efforts and how do I say, focus in the right direction or on the right areas. Else, towards the end, if you find something, you initially thought of low and little you realize it's high, you're actually going to struggle in terms of, convincing people that it is high. Also, asking for more additional evidences, because the client is going to give you a big pushback saying that, guys, I've already given maximum. My team's time is full. They cannot spare all the time for their audit. They have XYZ things to do. And these are all the practical challenges we face, right? So, that's the scenario, and hence that's why planning is so critical. Any questions on this? I know I'm just going on and on and on. So, guys, if you have any questions. Okay. Let me just cover this slide and then let's take a break for maybe 5 minutes, if that's fine with all of you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So risk assessment, audit scope and objectives. This is something that we have already just discussed, right? Team composition, timeline, budget requirements. Now, this the reason I'm highlighting it here is what happens is a lot of times, we tend to say, okay, I have X number of controls into X number of hours. Whereas, that's honestly not the case. Certain controls will take more hours, whereas certain controls are going to take lesser hours. So if let's say configuration control, that is going to take you a shorter time to see, right? It's just a configuration. So it's going to take you a shorter time to see. But if let's say a sample-based control, where you have to, let's say, see changes or see user access or see vulnerability, resolution, in those cases, your samples will be much higher. Sometimes it could go as high as 25 or 45, depending on the risk, right? Or depending on the organization's methodology as well. And in those cases, you have to ensure that the time for consideration that you keep is higher. Else, you will end up, just burning, working 12, 14 hours in a day because you yourself have given a specific timeline and you're basically how to meet that. And you realize that, the time that you factored in is much lesser than what is honestly really needed. So these considerations also should be looked at when you're doing your planning. Please ensure that, when you do, of course, when we look at come to control identification also we'll see, but the control designing also is done in such a way that you can easily classify configuration control separately, sample-based control separately, let's say inquiry control separately or observation control separately. And that will help you to optimize the team allocation, because let's say if you are having 2 to 3 members in a team and you want to ensure that everybody has the same hours, but they may not necessarily have the same number of controls. The reason being, as I said, sample-based controls take more time, configurations that take lesser time, for example, depending on the number of configurations you're seeing. So that aspect is very, very critical at the planning stage to basically determine and to do budgeting. Now you may say, okay, I just get the control list and they ask me to test it. How do I do in those scenarios? In those scenarios also, let's say you are not, or rather you do not, you are not responsible, let's say, for budgeting, or you do not have much authority in terms of determining how to do. But at least you have the judgment or knowledge in terms of whatever controls are given to you. So the initial stage when you get the controls, I would suggest at least try and look at what the process was in the previous year, how the testing was done, what was the sample size, right? What changes could have been made in the between the last year and this year, and has that impacted my sample sizes or my control testing approach? And because of that, is the hours that have been provided, are the hours that have been provided sufficient? Right? Do I need to, what all do I need to look at? Do I need to look at policy process? Do I need to look at sampling methodology? Or rather, do I need to look at the X number of samples? Do I need to look at configurations? Do I need to look at, let's say, reconciliations? Do I need to look at reports? So all those aspects should be considered when basically your initial stage you get your controls, to understand whether the timelines or the time provided or the time that you're communicating to the client also is correct. A lot of times, let's say, we say, okay, the walkthrough will get done in an hour, but whereas the client process may actually be very complicated. It may take more than 1 hour also. So I would suggest as a practical tip, always keep it open-ended. You say that fine, let's have the first call for maybe 1 hour or 1.5 hours, and at that time we will decide whether we need to have any subsequent calls or not. So at least that gives you the freedom to basically say that, okay, if future calls are needed, you can say I need a future call. Let's have it maybe tomorrow or day after, whatever it is, you can fix it up. But if you don't need anything, you can say, okay, we are good with this particular call. I have got what I needed. Please provide me ABC. So those are certain things that practically we as auditors need to keep in mind from a consideration standpoint, and that need to be will help you basically make your life easy. So the whole objective for here, especially in terms of the budgeting and all, is to make your life easy so that you don't end up working again 12 14 hours, just running behind samples, running behind clients to get data and all. So just keep this, this certain consideration which need to be kept in mind. Yeah, we are at 11:30, so let's take a break. Diti, 10 minutes. I don't know if Diti is there on the call or not. So everyone, 10 minutes is fine. We'll touch back again, be here at 11:40.
Sure, sir.
Okay.
Okay, tha.
Yep. Okay. Okay, then let's start again at 11:40. Hi, everyone.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me present my screen again. Right. So, okay, we are at the planning considerations, right? So, after planning considerations, the next step is basically identification of entity level controls. Now, this is something which is going to be common and which is basically, how do I say, pervasive across all organizations. And this is also something which is going to be common for, or rather, I would say, along with the other operational audit teams also, manual audit teams also. The reason being that entity level controls are something which is always at an organization level, right? And those are something which allow an auditor to basically.
Mr. Taha, can you, the box stop sharing, can you use the word height block so that we can see the full screen? No. You press the height.
Yeah, one second. I'm just sharing it again.
Sharing and then click the height.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
No worries. That's fine. Is it visible now?
You click the height. Yes, you click the height. That's good. I mean, if you click the height, the word it should go away.
Oh, okay, hide you're saying. Oh,
yeah, okay, now perfect.
No, I keep it because it helps me, to.
Okay, then whichever way, as long as you can see the full screen.
No, we're good. So, okay, the whole point, thanks for that. So the whole objective is like, entity level controls basically are nothing but the tone at the top, right? And if an organization has appropriate or, proper entity level controls, then you will basically get the first level of comfort in terms of whether a control environment, be it IT or be it manual, right, is basically in place and can be relied upon, right? And in that scenario, again, when we talk about entity level controls, people always think, oh, it's at an organization level, it's board of directors and all. How is it relevant to me from an IT standpoint? There are also a lot of activities which are relevant from IT, right, in terms of entity. In today's world, there are very few board meetings which are done where IT is not there. In the sense, most of the board meetings that we see, right, that at least that I see when I do for organizations, good size organizations, right, most of their board meetings will have a topic or other area of discussion on IT updates. Similarly, audit committee meetings also, when it happens, there is a very specific update on IT audit, right? Today, board members, audit committee members ask whether IT audits are IT applications are part of the scope for audit, internal, external, whatever audit it is, right? Whether ISO, what was the, if let's say an organization is doing ISO, what was the outcome? Were there any findings? How were those findings addressed? So that is one aspect where at an organization level, entity level controls become very, very critical. And they determine whether you will be able to place reliance, whether your risk assessment, right, you can consider controls at normal risk or high risk. Because if let's say there is something wrong at your entity level, in terms of, let's say, you realize that there is constant change at the board of directors or constant change in the IT department itself, then will your control environment have a low risk or a high risk, right? So that is one of the aspects, or that are few of the aspects which are very, very relevant when it comes to looking at entity level controls. Now, if you see here, right, and are the foundation for all other controls. So if you see here, management philosophy, org structure, ethics, board oversight. Now, how is it relevant from an IS standpoint? Management philosophy and org structure, right, are, when you look at management philosophy, one aspect which would come is security awareness, part of the organization's DNA, right? So our employees basically made aware of security awareness. I know what that is one of the aspects which are looked in ISO as well. That is also an organization level control, right? A risk assessment, for example. So that's an entity level control. So that is where, your management philosophy, your control environment management philosophy comes in. Org structure. whom does the IT report actually report into? Let's say if the IT head is reporting to finance, right? Then certain aspects, there is a possibility of controls getting, compromised when it comes to changes or when it comes to certain aspects. When independence comes into the question. So who is IT reporting to, right? Similarly, ethics and integrity, fine, that's more at an organizational level. Board oversight, as I was saying, does the board of directors regularly take IT updates? Do they track IT issues at a board level? Right, and this is very, very important because that will allow you to gauge the, I would say, effectiveness of your risk assessment. Because if let's say the board is tracking it, that means at an organization level, they are aware of what are the critical IT risks, what are the issues, right? And how those issues should be dealt with. So board oversight is very, very important when you look at the control environment. Similarly, coming to IT governance, right? IT strategy alignment. Does the organization have an IT strategy in the first place? Now, how is an IT strategy important? Basically, IT strategy, let's say you will do typically planning more towards the beginning part of the year, right? Initial part of the year. If the organization has a defined IT strategy, right, and they say, look, but let's say if it's a Jan to December year, you're doing your planning somewhere in April or March or April, right? And the organization has a roadmap which says by October they want to implement a completely new system, right? For let's say ticketing or put something else. In that scenario, you will be able to tailor your control requirements and tailor your testing procedures to align with basically the new application which is going to come in. You will also be able to assess and identify whether, how do I say, you need to change your strategy in terms of testing, right? Do you need to put in more effort? Is there something going to be relevant? Is there something going to be critical? So all those aspects will help. Secondly, IT strategy alignment also will basically help you to understand, again, from a risk assessment standpoint, from a vulnerability management standpoint, from your change management standpoint, right? How the organizational direction is and what reliance can you place on the controls. If it's aligned, if there is a strategy, if it's monitored, then your reliance on controls will be higher. So that means your risk will be lower. See the question, the risk and control, how do I say? It's contra, right? The higher the risk, the lower the reliance on the control. The lower the risk, the higher the reliance on the control. Correct? If you're relying on a control and you're happy with the control, right? The higher the reliance that, okay, this control, if it works, the way the control is done, the way it is basically, the control is structured, the way the control is performed. If as an auditor, you are actually placing a higher level of reliance on that particular control, then the risk associated with that control automatically comes down. And vice versa, right? If you don't rely much on the control, if let's say somebody says, we do this particular observation, right? We do this review on a quarterly basis, but user access review, but you are not very happy in terms of whether the management is actually doing the review or not, then that means the reliance on that particular control is less. So that means the risk will be high. The risk that the review is not done appropriately is high. In that case, you may say, okay, I also want to reperform. Give me the list of users, current list of users. I also want to recheck with, let's say, the AD list or whatever it is to see that, whether the review has been done correctly. Are there any users who are not supposed to be there, are actually there as part of, still there in the system. So your reliance on a control will determine the risk and will determine the audit procedure as well. Correct? Because the lower the risk, the higher the reliance, then the lesser the procedure that you will actually end up doing. Right. Again, policies and procedures, these are also very, very important because if organization has set policies and procedures, that will help you basically standardize your controls as well. Because if there is, let's say, all the critical IT processes have a set procedure, then okay, fine, this is the control that they're going to follow. This is how the process is going to happen. And hence your reliance is higher on those policies and those controls. The risk comes down. Similarly, roles and responsibilities. If there's a defined set of roles and responsibilities, when you are doing your testing, right, it makes life easier for you because you will know, okay, this is the person who's supposed to approve this. This is the person who's supposed to approve changes. This is the person who's supposed to approve, let's say, implementation or deployment. So that scenario will basically help you to, again, I would say, fine tune your audit procedures to ensure that you only look at this particular aspect, and anything else which comes up, you can at least, you will know that it's an exception or it's a deficiency. So that's basically the main objective of roles and responsibilities. Finally, performance metrics are very important because that will give you a reliance in terms of whether the organization monitors the performance, right? Whether you can rely on, whether the organization has a process in place to look at their control environment, to look at their processes, to ensure that whatever is being done is in line with the organization's objectives and policies, and hence performance metrics are very important. So as I said, when you look at the board oversight, if let's say performance metrics are being presented there, then you know that at an org level or at an organization level, basically they are looking into the performance metrics, and hence that can be as a control that you include as part of your testing as well. If the organization doesn't have a proper performance metrics, you will actually have to look at the other different controls to fulfill your, or rather I would say, mitigate the risk that we identify. Risk management, again, ELCs, when you look at entity level controls, does the organization has a risk assessment? Very, very critical. I know a lot of you have done, look at it, have done ISOs or looked at ISOs or done ISO audits. Risk assessment is one of the most critical processes which is a requirement, and that's a requirement across. Risk assessment is not just for ISO. When you look at the normal standard audit, when you look at, let's say, you're doing a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, or when you're doing some other process, some other internal audit, risk assessment is the first step. If the organization itself doesn't know what risks, or doesn't identify, or doesn't properly have control over what risks are impacting the organization, then you know that that organization does not have proper controls and mechanisms in place. So risk assessment is very, very critical. Similarly, risk appetite, in the sense, how does organization determine what risk it will accept or not? Monitoring, and finally, the escalation procedures in terms of if something doesn't work, whether there is an escalation procedure available. A lot of organizations, I have seen cases where people will set up the risk assessment, they will do everything, but there will not be a proper escalation because they will expect, okay, we have a risk assessment process, right? If it is done or not done, our auditor is happy when they see we have a risk assessment and we have a plan. But if that plan is implemented, not implemented, that's a next year headache. So those are scenarios also, as an auditor, we need to keep in mind whether there are appropriate escalation procedures. Finally, coming to monitoring, is there an internal audit function? If it is, your task becomes easier because somebody else is basically reviewing before you going and review, or you yourself are part of the internal audit. Then basically gives you that assurance that, okay, there is an independent function in the organization which is actually looking at the controls, which is testing the controls before an external auditor actually comes in and tests. Similarly, management reviews, exception reporting, and continuous monitoring is more in terms of the monitoring mechanisms which are in place, right? How the organization ensures that all this is actually happening. Now, what impact do these ELCs have on the audit plan? So I know we have been discussing this. Can anyone tell me, will ELCs impact your audit plan? As let's say, a lot of you have practically done audits, right? So will ELC have an impact on the audit plan? Or have you come across any scenario where an ELC had an impact on your audit? Anyone can share. I just want to get your thoughts on how you've seen ELCs in your in your audits or in your scenario. Have you come across, or have you been did you ever feel that, okay, if this ELC had been in place, at least the testing that I'm doing from an IT standpoint would have been reduced? So have you come across any such scenarios?
Yes, I already faced this in my company. For example, some license for softwares not renewed. So suddenly the system will be stuck, everyone complaining why we are not able to access. Sometimes when you are not getting the permission from the management, or the people who's in charge. Some people accessing CCTV without permission, which is not allowed. This is for permission from the policy and procedures. Sometimes people cross over these things, like in the organization structure, they should make the offices in some way it will be accepted in UAE, but maybe they put the offices so if there's any fire alarm or something, the people cannot pass easily, so it will make traffic, and this is not okay.
Thanks so much, Mona, for sharing that. That's absolutely spot on. If let's say you don't have appropriate guidance, policies, or procedures, right, it does have an impact on your environment, and it does have an impact on the controls, right? If let's say your policies are not defined, right, or the responsibility is not fixed, or there is no set procedure, then it will definitely have an impact on the way you have to test. You know that if there is a policy in place, that the organization would have followed this, and it makes it easy for you to test certain aspects of a control. But if there is nothing there, then it is very difficult for you to determine, okay, what are they going to do, right? It will take time, as she said. It may delay certain processes, or it may lead to non-compliance. So those are certain aspects that need to be considered when we are actually looking at ELCs, entity level controls. And please keep this in mind. I know practically you may not come across in a lot of cases, but yeah, policies, procedures, risk assessment, you may not come across all of this, but trust me, from an IT standpoint, policies and procedures are very important, because if an organization doesn't have an IT security policy, trust me, that itself is a red flag, right? So IT policies and procedures are very important. Roles and responsibilities also, because when you especially look at user access and change management, somebody has to approve, somebody has to review, right? You need to have monitoring mechanisms in place. So those aspects, and risk assessment, especially for IT risks, for cyber related risks, if organization doesn't have an appropriate risk assessment in place, that itself is a red flag for you to refine your test procedures or refine your testing strategy itself, I would say, right? So thanks a lot, Mona, for that. Okay, moving on to the next. So this is basically, as I said, PCAOB is the apex, in the sense they are sort of the trendsetters. So in today's, as of today, right, a lot of countries have specified or mandated the ICFR or the IFC internal control requirement. You have US, you have India, you have Canada, you have Australia, you have UK. UK, in fact, is now coming with their own SOX requirement, which is going to become mandatory from, I guess, this year end or so. So, it's basically it does give some examples of what entity level control should be, right? And such a certain control environments have an important but indirect impact. And again, remember, whenever you talk about finance, you'll always talk about misstatement. Why? Because as an auditor, you are basically stating or giving an opinion on the numbers. And if the numbers are wrong, that means they're misstated. That means the person who's looking at the financial statements, right, may get the wrong, may take a wrong decision, rather, I would say. And how is this relevant from an IT audit standpoint? Very simple. If let's say the change management for an ERP fails, and somebody is able to go and, as I give a simple example for Satyam, right, where they were able to manipulate the back-end code in such a way that if a report is taken, it used to only give the list of certain invoices which were raised. It did not give for all invoices. And because of that, the numbers which were actually being seen by the auditor, right, were different from the actual or real numbers which the invoices which the organization was printing versus what it was actually showing. And because of that, right, now from an IT auditor perspective, you may say, what is the how I have looked at my change management control, all was fine. So how will it impact my financial statement or a change management? So I'm just saying a practical example. If let's say the changes are the organization, or rather the controls are such that you are able to do unauthorized changes, right, that may impact or account a financial transaction, and which in turn will basically impact the misstatement. And globally, if you look at any reports which are published, the main reason or the number one reason for breaches, for I would say, hacking or for frauds is financial gain, right? So at the end of the day, the controls that we see, the risks that we determine will also be in line with misstatements of financial statements or financial gains. And in those terms, it will basically boil down to the IT risk, whether I can make unauthorized changes, whether passwords are appropriate, because else I may be able to hack into the system and make inappropriate changes or unauthorized changes. So that's basically the entire flow. So here, as you say, basically has an important but indirect effect. Similarly, entity level controls monitor the effectiveness of other controls. As we said, if I have a risk assessment or if I have, let's say, performance metrics, those are basically monitoring my other controls, because performance metrics are, let's say, monitoring my capacity utilization, my patch management, right? So this aspect gets covered. And finally, some entity level controls might be designed to operate at a level of precision that would adequately prevent or detect misstatements to relevant assertions. Okay, this is English, but at the end of the day, it's basically saying that they may be in such a way that they help prevent or detect a fraud or a misstatement. How would it do that? Simple example is a review control, right? Let's say a management review of financial statements. At a board level, let's say they are reviewing the financial statements to identify whether any inappropriate or whether the how do I say, the organization is going in the right direction, right? So in those cases, all that. Similarly for IT, somebody is reviewing the transactions, activities which are done by, let's say, the database administrator, right? And somebody is reviewing at a board level, the activity is done by privileged user. At a senior level, the activity is done by a privileged user. So those would basically act as a deterrent to see whether, when an activity is being done by a privileged user, that is actually being done appropriately or correctly. So that's primary objectives of entity level controls. Now, coming to, okay, we have discussed planning, we have discussed, considerations, we have discussed entity level controls as well, controls at an organization level. Now we come at controls at a operations level, right? So what are the factors that need to be considered when I want to identify the flows of transactions and through that the relevant applications which need to be in scope? So the first and the primary thing is identifying the transaction itself. How is the money flowing through the organization, right? How is the money, or how is the process, or how is the product, how is the hours, how is my basically main commodity flowing through the organization? So if, let's say, you realize for a manufacturing organization, okay, if I'm manufacturing a product, the flow is basically happening through, let's say, an SAP or an Oracle. So right from my requisition to my purchase order to my purchase actual material receipt to my finance booking to my payment, right, to my vendor master creation or vendor management, all that is, let's say, happening through one particular application or two applications. Then you will need to understand if my transactions are flowing through here and whether my controls are also going through here. My transactions might flow through this particular application, but my controls may also lie somewhere else. That possibility is also there. But here, let's keep it simple. I may say I have an application through which my transactions are flowing, and whether that flow has an impact on my financial statements. It has, then those applications need to be kept in scope. Now the question which would come is, how would I then look at my, how will I include my data centers? My data centers don't have anything to do with my financial statements, right? Similarly, my network appliances, firewalls, they don't have anything to do with financial statements. So why do I include them? Can anyone give an answer for that? Others also can take a guess. I just want to know, why do we include IT systems? In the sense, why do we include servers? Why do we include network firewalls? Why do we include data centers as part of IT audit? Anyone want to just take a guess?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? So I stepped out and back again.
No way. So my question was, we have when I'm identifying application, right? So I will look at the transaction flow. How is my transaction flow? So when my transaction flow is identified and I've identified an application, right? I'm going to look at the IT controls which impact my financial statement. Right? So I may say, okay, I'm using SAP for, let's say, my purchases, my entire purchase process, procurement process. Similarly, let's say I'm using Dynamics for my, let's say, software development, in the sense my time booking process, for example, or Workday for my entire time booking process. Fine, I'm looking that I have certain controls. So let's say if I make if I want to place a purchase order, there are certain segregation of duties which need to be followed, and that is followed in the ER. And that control is something which is key. Then why do I actually look at my data center? Why do I look at my firewall? Why do I look at my network compliance? Why are those controls important?
So it could be because of privacy requirement, whether there's any malicious activity, as well as to monitor the database. Is that a possibility?
Yes. Yes, part of it. You're right. You're right. So, but in the sense, all of those actually. So what happens is typically an application, when you test an application, there are two ways of testing an application, or there are two modes of how we test an application. One is controls through the application, and one is controls around the application. Right? The reason I'm saying controls through the application and around the application is because, let's say, I have my procurement process, and I have a control where I cannot raise a PO without an approval. For example, I cannot raise a purchase order without somebody approving it in the system. Right? Everybody with me on that? Okay. So in that control is in the system. It is through the system, basically. Right? That's what the system is actually designed to do. Right? But to impact or to do that, to perform that control, I have to do certain activities around the system. In the sense, I have to basically log into the system, right? I have to open that configuration, or I have to make a change to the code to basically enable that particular configuration, for example. And when I do that, those are controls which are basically around the system. And because I'm looking at controls around the system, as you said, because I'm looking at privacy, I'm looking at vulnerability, I will need to look at, again, we said, right, what supports my application. So here, I may have certain things which support my application, either software or hardware as well. Software could be, like, say, Jira or your ticket ServiceNow or ticketing tool or some other supporting application. Hardware would be in the form of firewalls, in the form of servers, physical servers, in the form of network devices, because if those also get compromised, then my system will get compromised. See, apart from me, let's say, giving a wrong setting for a approver, if I give an incorrect, setting for a password, somebody else can manipulate this particular control. Am I clear? Or if I'm not making sense, please ask questions on this, because this is very, very critical in terms of the entire IS audit process.
I don't understand the around the process.
Okay. So around, it's not around the process, it's more around the system, right?
Okay.
Around the application. So password control, right?
Yeah.
Change management control. They don't reside in the application. They're actually outside the application. But they are relevant to that application, correct? So change management. The control is outside the application. You may do changes in the system. The controls are actually outside. Right? Similarly, for example, physical protection to the server. The application is residing either in the cloud or at a data center. But it's a physical device, right? There's nothing you can see in the application for protection of a physical device, right? You have to look at actual physical control. So that's the reason those are around the application. Don't get confused by this terminology. It is just, I am using it to simplify. Okay. Because we have to also look at applications or hardware or systems which will have an impact on the controls in the ERP or in the in-scope application. Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't get the point from the answer of your question. So now we add the servers and this for which purpose?
I'm not able to hear you clearly, Mona. I couldn't make that out. You can type it in. I'll see it in the.
Yes, please.
So what I'm basically trying to say is, when we are talking about controls, around the system, when you're talking about scoping in application, right? Identifying flows. We also need to consider the supporting applications or supporting infrastructure as well. And that supporting infrastructure is what basically, how do I say, enables us to place, or rather, make an opinion on the reliance of controls in the application. Again, let's take a simple example of SAP as an ERP, right? All of you have heard about SAP. You know, it's an application that basically supports financial process. Okay, I'm looking you for this one. Okay, so yeah, okay, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Why do we need to add servers and assets to the audit, right? The question, I'll come back again to what I was saying. How do I identify my applications? See, when you, an organization might have 100 applications that they're using. Okay, you're all aware, right? You've been working for organizations. There are almost 100 applications which an organization uses. How do you decide which application is actually to be tested? You will, so let's say it's a pharmaceutical company. Okay, you will not test R&D applications, but you do test your billing application. You do test your, let's say, procurement application. You may end up testing certain, how do I say, cataloging applications, but you may actually not test your actual R&D application. Now, why is that so? Why do you test some applications? Why do you not test others? Because it depends on the purpose. Here, the purpose is basically, let's say, if the purpose is financial statement audit, then I will only look at those applications which impact my financial statements. If it's, let's say, ISO, right? So ISO, I will only look at those systems for which basically I'm actually doing the ISO, right? An organization, we have a financial, see, when I do an ISO, for instance, I don't look at the financial application, right? I look at more of the ISMS on the other aspects. So the organization may have, their servers located in 2 data centers. Okay, one data center may hold servers for financial applications. Another may hold servers for, let's say, non-financial or operational applications, which are not in your scope. Would you include both the data centers? No. Why? Because you're only looking at what is relevant to you. So how do you determine what is relevant to you? You look at the purpose of your audit. If it is financial statement audit, then you will only look at those applications which impact your financial statements. Now, you have identified that application. Okay, let's say it's SAP or Oracle, for instance. You have identified the application. Again, that application just doesn't work standalone. It is dependent on a lot of things, right? One, it is dependent on its underlying infrastructure. Because irrespective of however good controls I have in my application, if the OS goes down, my application crashes. Or if my database goes down, my application crashes. So I have to include my operating system and my database. Correct? Now, operating system, database, and application depend on my network connectivity. So that means I need to scope in my network infrastructure as well. But do I need to scope in everything? No. I only need to scope in those network infrastructure which could lead to a vulnerability, which may allow somebody to unauthorized access, or which may basically take down the system itself. So I look at that particular network device. Now, lastly, those ERPs are hosted somewhere. Either it could be on the cloud or it could be in a physical data center, in a server. If let's say even though I may have all the controls around operating system, database, network, if somebody is going to has access to physically go and shut off the server, right? Unauthorized access to just turn off the server, my application still fails, right? Because it's not there, it's not available. So I have to include that security also, your data center security or your firewall security, correct? So those are the aspects that need to be considered when you are determining your scope. So my point, what I was trying to say was that when you are identifying your primary application, only basis that you identify your underlying infrastructure and supporting database, supporting infrastructure, that is including operating system, your database, your data center, your firewall, your network devices. Organizations typically, now the reason I'm saying this is because organizations have multiple applications. They will segregate, either their servers in a separate way, they will segregate the networks in a separate way. So I am only interested in knowing what is impacting the applications that are in scope for me. And for those, whether the controls for all these supporting systems are also designed and operating effectively. I hope this clarifies.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yep. So, that's the reason this is the most critical step where we basically understand, right, how my testing approach is going to be. See, I've done my planning, I have identified the applications. Now coming here, I identify my flow of transactions. I say, okay, what are the supporting systems that I need to consider? What is the underlying applications I'm going to look at, right? And here again, I'm going to make a call in terms of to what extent I'm going to test, right? Because see, I can test a lot of aspects, but we restrict ourselves as an auditor, right? You may test licenses, but as a typical IT audit, we typically don't test software licenses. Not in all cases. Some cases we do, some cases we don't. But let's say if you take a financial transaction audit, you don't check software licenses. But that is also an important factor, right? You cannot use an unlicensed system. Okay. So why is that the case? How do you determine that? So that again depends on what are so those aspects are part of what exactly is my transaction flow, what is my objective of doing this particular audit, and finally, what risks am I trying to cover, right? So here, if you see, what are the stages of transaction flow? Initiation. How does a transaction start? A lot of times what happens is a transaction might start in application 1, get processed in application 2, and get reported in application 3. So as an audit, when you actually doing your scoping, you have to understand whether do I need to include 1, 2, 3, or just 2 and 3, or maybe just 1 and 3, right? So those aspects are something which need to be considered when we are looking at transaction flows. Similarly, processing is basically the system handles. How is the processing happening? Are the controls lying in the system or outside the system? When I say outside the system, I have seen a lot of cases where, let's say, payroll processing is done by the system, but somebody actually takes out the whole report and checks it manually, does the whole calculation manually in Excel or whatever it is, and then basically does the approves it. So in those cases, do I actually need to rely on do I need to look at the transactions in the system? So do I need to scope in the system at all in the first place? If it's just being used as a calculator, for example, right? So those considerations are also very, very critical. And recording, capture, right? Where are the transactions going and sitting? Which databases are getting impacted? So let's say an application might be connected to a database. So do I need to include the database or not? So those aspects also need to be considered. Now, if you see this aspect, right, a company's business processes are activities that are designed to develop, purchase, produce, sell, and distribute a company's products. Now, what is the guide for you to consider this? These are the guides. If an application or a business process is basically, if an application is impacting a business process, and that process, how do you determine if there is something which is used to develop, purchase, produce, sell, or distribute any company products or service, right? Record information, and finally ensure compliance with laws and regulations. You might sometimes factor scope in a system because it is basically used for compliance. Right? In those cases also, you might want to include a particular system. Because let's say a GRC. Organization is having a GRC, has implemented a GRC, which is basically capturing all my, how do I say, documents, my record retention and all. So that I'm including because that's more from a compliance perspective. Right? When you talk about backups, record retention, is it backups are taken for 8 years? Why do you need, currently, if let's say something happens, I cannot do anything with an 8-year-old data, correct? If let's say my system goes down today, what am I going to do with the data or a backup which is 8 years old? I need a backup which is current. So, but why do I retain that data? Because it's more of a compliance standpoint. So certain applications and processes are in scope because they impact certain business activities, and these basically are the business activities. Just as an anecdote, typically when you do an audit of a data center itself, for example, okay, when you're doing an audit of a data center, the information IT audit at a data, when you do for a data center, you actually don't look at controls around their customer network. You look at controls around their network only. You will only look at the physical security of the floor. You will actually not look at the physical security of the racks because that's not your responsibility. Whereas as a customer, for me, it is very important how my rack is actually secured at a data center. So the perspective changes depending on what you are actually looking at. And that is very, very critical when it comes to identifying your transaction flows. Any questions on this? I know this slide is a little, I would not say complicated, but a little heavy. So, but this is the most important one because you do this right, your entire audit process goes smooth. Because if let's say you forget to identify something here, you later on identify the client or the process owner is going to come back saying, you guys, you should have done this at the planning stage. You're not doing the scoping correctly. This is not required. This is something additional. So this is the stage where you need to have to be very mindful in terms of what exactly you scope in. Okay,
Yes, Taha, I agree with you because I can see, like, I also experience the same things while we are like implementing or auditing ISO. So you are explaining well. I'm totally agree with you.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. So now coming to the next aspect, risk. We have covered, we have done the planning, we have identified our applications, right? We have identified our supporting applications, right? So we know basically what is our scope, what we need to see. Okay. Now the next step which comes in, what is the relevance that I have to place? What is the risk, right? So if you look at any control, let's say the organization says I have ABCD controls in place for this particular application or for this particular IT process, right? So what are the risks which are associated with the control? Organization will say I have everything. I have all the controls on the planet. I know most of you would have heard that, right? You go to the IT guys, IT head will say, I have everything in place. My team tracks and monitors everything. I have all the controls. But when, as an IT auditor, when you actually look at it, you'll realize, There is no email available for this. There is no documentation available for changes basically done through a Teams chat rather than an email or a change form. So a lot of such scenarios will come up for you. So in those cases, how do you determine what risk you should associate, and that will in turn determine what type of procedure you should actually do. So the first one, of course, is an inherent risk, right? Inherent is the control itself will have its own risk. If I talk about privileged access, that itself inherently is a very risky control, because if that is in the wrong hands, there's a lot of chances of vulnerabilities, frauds, whatnot, right? So risk present before considering any controls itself, based on the transaction or account, nature of the transaction. Here, please don't say if transaction is business. Transaction could be IT also. An IT transaction is nothing but, let's say, a new user creation or a change request approval. That is also a transaction from an IT standpoint. Okay, so when we talk about nature of transaction, that includes an IT specific transaction as well. So one is the inherent risk. Second is the control risk. So risk that the control itself will not prevent or detect misstatement. Here, a misstatement again may be used from a financial standpoint, but when we come to risk associated in IT, we realize that the control risk is nothing but it will basically, although I may say that I have a good control in terms of change management and all, but let's say the developer is basically getting the change approved, but the developer themselves are actually implementing the change in the production. Then the control is of absolutely no use. Correct? Because I have made the change. Somebody said yes. I can again modify something more and then just implement it. Right? So that basically defeats the entire purpose of the control. So that you have to be basically mindful of in terms of whether the control is going to meet the requirement. And finally, detection risk is basically whether we ourselves will be able to detect using that control. So something like a reconciliation. So is the reconciliation designed in such a way it will allow a detection of a fraud or error or a misstatement? In this case, for a simple example, I'll say is, let's say terminated users. So let's say a user has left the organization. That means their ID should be terminated within whatever time frame, stipulated time frame, 1 day, 2 days, or whatever it is, right? In that scenario, typically organizations do a review every month end, saying that, or either month end or quarter end, to determine whether all the users who are supposed to be revoked have been revoked or not. And if that control itself is not done appropriately, or the data itself is not available to do that control, then you know that that control is only on paper, but in reality is not working. So that's basically a detection risk. And an audit risk is basically a combination of all the three. When you determine the risk, right, for a particular control, you have to basically take all these three into account when you're determining the risk. A lot of times, right, when you get a control to test, the risk will already be marked either high or normal or very high, depending on the nature of this. So a lot of times you as an auditor also can give your inputs. If you feel that the control is marked as low, as normal, but then it should be high, then you can basically use these factors to determine and say, look, this control should actually be marked as high because of ABC, right? The owner has changed during the year, or this control is done like this, which actually doesn't serve the purpose. So that is something that you can do. Similarly, if let's say it's marked as high and you feel that, everything is in place, it may be high last year, but in the current year, everything is in place, the process is stable, you're able to meet the requirements, looking at the control. In that case, you can actually suggest the risk to be downgraded to normal rather. Okay, it's normal, high, and very high. So from high to normal. And what that will do is that will reduce your audit effort. So it's a win-win for everyone. But you need to have a justification for it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I want to share my experience. When I look at these risks, inherent risk is high, and then they put control in place. The residual risk is then straight away go to low. So it is then when you challenge the customer, usually they say, "Oh yes, for us we feel it is low." So because it becomes very subjective, so sometimes it's difficult to manage the situation like this. from experience, very high, straight away come to low.
I agree with you.
So just we look at the impact and impact analysis, and then we check with them, then say, oh, management also approve. Then there's no argument with us, but
Yes.
I just want to share this experience.
No, absolutely. And this is very relevant because the risk will determine your testing. If the risk is high, the number of samples that you end up testing also increases, right? So, if you take a higher risk, the amount of work that you will actually end up doing increases. And because of that, the chances of you, getting a deficiency or an exception, because let's say if one transaction is processed incorrectly and the risk is high, then the entire control fails. Okay, we'll come to that also, evaluation. That is another this thing in itself. But I'm just saying the risk is critical because for a high risk control, the leeway that you get as an auditor also in terms of testing is very narrow. So you need to test higher samples. You need to justify to management as to, why this control failure is you're failing the entire process because this control has failed, because it's ranked as high. So you have to, in the sense, be in alignment with the management when it actually comes to risk determination. Please be very mindful of this, and the risk determination will determine your efforts, your how, let's say if there is an issue or a deficiency which comes in or an exception which comes in, how that will get treated, how the remediation should be done. All that is dependent on your risk. So hence, as Supo was also saying, it is very, very critical. If the risk itself is not done correctly, then the management is just going to come at you with everything they have, saying that the risk should be low, it should not be high, because we have this in place, that in place. And hence, if there is an issue or exception which gets identified, they will be able to knock it out, saying that it is not relevant or not important. So please keep this aspect in mind. Now, what we looked at was generic. This is where basically we look at risks which are associated with IT controls, right? These are risks which are, how do I say, directly associated with an IT area. And you need to keep this in mind because, see, normal risks will be more in terms of risk of overstatement of revenue, for example, right? So that's a business risk. But from an IT perspective, what could be my IT risk, right? One is unauthorized access to applications. So when you see here, technology, right? System failures or downtime. So one of the critical risks would be risk of system downtime or risk of unplanned downtime. Not planned is fine, but let's say if it's unplanned downtime because of whatever reason, something not being, how do I say, configured appropriately, or capacity planning not being done correctly. So this would be a risk. What is the control against that particular risk? Right? Data corruption, unauthorized access, the most critical one, correct? Unauthorized access, segregation of duties, okay, cyber attacks, integration issues. Integration is nothing but interfaces, right? Basically, systems talking to each other. Integration issues. So these are these are aspects which need to be considered. So when you are designing your risks and your controls, you will need to have these as a base to determine, or rather to understand whether, I am covering all my risks, and basically, I'm having the appropriate controls to meet that particular risk. Why this is important? Because at the end of the day, when you're giving reliance, right? When you say, see, if you look at any financial statements, you say true and fair, and basically controls are designed and operating effectively. ICFR, be it SOC, be it anywhere. The conclusion basically is that the controls are designed and operating effectively. And to achieve that, to achieve a control, what's a control? A control is something you put in place to meet a risk, right? Now I'll throw this one here. Why do we have brakes in cars? Anyone? Why do we have brakes in a car?
Control the speed.
Exactly. So What does the brake help you with? It helps you to, no, is it to control the speed? To reduce the
Any
speed?
damage?
Sorry?
Prevent any damage?
Okay. Is that it? Is that the main reason for brakes?
To slow down?
Human
prevent-
injury?
Look at the other way around. It actually, if you have a brake, what are you able to do?
Maneuver?
You're able to go faster.
Prevent accident?
No, you're able to go faster. Exactly. See, prevent accident and all is the outcome. But what does a brake allow you to do? It allows you to go faster, right? If you didn't have a brake, you would be actually going very slow, or you would not be driving at all, right? Because there's a brake, you know that I have a control in place, and hence I can actually do this particular activity. I have a brake, I can go faster because I can stop the car anytime I want. So similarly, any control in place is basically to meet a risk or meet a business objective. An inverse of a business objective is risk. Okay. It may sound a little odd, but if you take any objective, the inverse of an objective will be the risk. So if my objective is to grow the business, the risk that the business does not grow. Similarly, from an IT standpoint, right? If my risk objective is that the system is available to users, the system processes appropriate transactions, then what is my risk? My risk is the inverse of an objective, correct? Which is what? That risk of unauthorized access, risk of system not being available, risk of segregation of duties. So ideally, your controls have to address a risk. If you have a control which doesn't address a risk, that means your mapping is incorrect, or that control is not a control at all. So from when you do an audit, right, this is useful because trust me, when you even take exams like CISA, you will be asked questions around this only. I have this particular thing. What type of risk does it address, or what type of control do I need to address this particular risk? Correct. And in that scenario, it is very critical to understand that I have controls in place to address risks. Without a risk, I don't need to have a control. So here, when I'm talking about IT risks, when you are actually doing your controls identification, when you say, okay, I'm going to test ABCD controls, you need to ensure that those map to the risks which are relevant for your particular audit. So for example, I'll take ISO itself, right? A lot of people in the here have experience with ISO. So ISO has a set of guidelines or a set of requirements. Now, what's the downside to it? Why are you taking the certification? That basically the organization meets this requirement. So what's the downside? As an auditor, what's the risk? That the organization is not meeting those requirements. So that's your risk. So what are you doing? You are basically looking at the controls that an organization is having, which basically meet this requirements or are able to fulfill this particular requirements or able to nullify that risk, right? Or mitigate that particular risk. So your base for any audit is always going to be risk, irrespective of whatever type of audit it is. Let's say if I'll take an example of a SOC 2. A SOC 2 report is basically a report on controls at a service organization, right? That's basically in controls for if, let's say, somebody is providing services to a third party, and the third party wants to know whether whatever I'm doing is basically appropriately controlled and designed. So in that case, there is a standard called SOC2, which will basically define certain criteria. It says, are systems available when needed? Are logical access, is there appropriate logical access? So that means what? I'm indirectly saying, does the organization run the risk of incorrect access or inappropriate access? And what are the controls it has? So at the end of the day, irrespective of whatever audit you do, it will flow down to what risks are getting covered. I know my statement may seem a little odd, but when you look at it, right, at the end of the day, if you have any controls, when you're testing your controls, why are you testing those controls? Because you're looking at mitigating certain risks. And if you, at the end of the day, you're left with certain risks which are not mitigated, that means the process has certain gaps, or the process is not complete. So when you do a gap analysis, what do? You look at a particular risk, you look at whether the organization has that control. If the control is not available, then you say this is a gap, and the organization is not meeting this requirement. So again, the reason I am reiterating again and again is, at the end of the day, right? Because going forward, we are going to discuss everything around controls only. This is the last part where we are actually talking about risks here. The I just want to say the risks are very important, because whatever you do in terms of testing has to be mapped to a risk, or has to mitigate certain risk. If you have a control which is not mitigating any critical risk, then actually you can leave that control. You not test that control as well. That's the way I'm going to put it. Any questions here? I know I'm yeah. Any questions still here? Or at least on this part, the risk part? Is it clear, or I am talking nonsense or something?
It's clear.
Okay. No, the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of people disagree on this part, saying no, you have a set of controls which is a baseline. Why should I worry about my risks? So, again, I always say that if you even have a baseline, the baseline is there to meet a specific risk requirement. And if that requirement itself is not there, then you don't have to look at that particular control. So just keep this in mind. Yeah. Now, coming to next, how to actually identify the controls. As I said, today it is more around the theory part, because today is this between today and maybe the first part of tomorrow. Part of tomorrow we will be discussing around theory, then we'll actually move on to the actual testing. So, here, how are we identifying controls? Now, when it comes to IT controls, are policies and procedures that ensure IT systems of it effectively secure, correct? In simple terms, if I am following a particular process, see, what's a control? A control is a step.
You're not sharing the screen.
Oh, shucks, I'm so sorry. I completely forgot. Thanks. Yeah, it's visible now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so sorry, right? So controls, how do you identify controls? So basically, I always say, what is a control? A control is a part of the process which is basically mitigating a risk, right? So I may have a process which may be 10 steps, but all the steps in a process will not be a control, because out of that 5 or 10 steps in a process, only 1 or 2 steps may actually mitigate certain risks, right? All other processes may be just part of what you do, right? So in that scenario, you have to identify in a particular process, right, what is the control which is going to, how do I say, what is a control, and how to identify basically whether this is a control or just a process. Okay. So what basically is IT controls, right? What all, when we talk about IT controls, what is part of IT controls? The first one is GITC, that is nothing but the general IT controls. Now, why they are called general IT controls? If you remember, we discussed, right? There are certain controls around the application, like passwords, like change management. So those are general IT controls because they are general in nature. They are generic, irrespective of the application, right? So for example, backup or change management will be there irrespective of the application. Application controls are basically your controls which are in the application. As I said, let's say I need an approval for a PO. If let's say somebody needs to create a process or a purchase order in the system, approval is required in the system itself. That's an application control because that's in the system. It is very specific to that particular application. So it's an application control. Similarly, you have an automated control. Both are used sort of concurrently. And the last part is IT dependent manual controls. Nothing but, let's say if I'm doing a reconciliation for which I use a report from an IT system, then I do a manual reconciliation. So those controls get classified as IT dependent manual controls. How are this relevant? We will discuss. I know today we are almost at 12:46 now, but at least this part I want to cover today, because tomorrow onwards we will then look at how ITGCs and all actually get defined. So when you talk about GITCs, right, they are your, I would say, general controls or controls which are outside the application. Now, what do I mean outside the application? All GITCs are, to an extent, either in the application or outside. But what I'm trying to say here again is these are controls which determine how an application is going to be secure, how an application is going to ensure integrity, how an application is going to basically ensure, let's say, data confidentiality or privacy. So those are aspects that a GITC or general IT controls cover. How do they do that? Let's say access or change management or backup, right? Or computer operations. Computer operations is nothing but your passwords and all. Okay. Now, why are they relevant? They determine whether my system can be relied upon in terms of somebody not being able to tamper with. Okay. Somebody cannot make unauthorized changes. At the end of the day, what's the whole purpose of a GITC? To see whether anyone can make unauthorized modifications or unauthorized changes to the system, right? Or get access to unauthorized data, unauthorized access to data in the system. So that's the whole objective of an ITGC. Similarly, for application and automated controls, it is basically to see whatever processing is happening in the system, is that correct? Is that complete and accurate? See, a lot of times when we talk about information systems audit, we typically talk about IT controls only, general IT controls only. But there is also aspect around automated controls. Now, automated controls, the challenge with automated controls is because they are very functional or other functional controls. They are more function specific in the sense they may be like whether fixed depreciation is calculated accurately on fixed assets. Now, that is also an IT control because at the end of the day, that also is happening in the system. That's a configuration in the system. And if it is configured incorrectly, all the transactions which are processed will get processed incorrectly. So that is also an IS control. Okay. Only thing is, we try and segregate it between a general IT control and an application control because an application control testing requires a specific focus and an understanding of the business process, whereas IT controls require more understanding of the IT environment. So that's the reason that bifurcation is done. But when you look at IS audit, right, Information Systems Audit, it does cover your IT controls as well as automated controls also. So people, let's say, who have more of a finance background, they may be able to, I would say, look at or give understanding on let's say automated controls, because they will know, okay, fine. If a depreciation, how is depreciation supposed to be calculated, right? What are the rates which is supposed to be taken, right? Are the entries getting posted to the correct GL accounts? So those are application controls where, let's say, a professional on the finance side may be able to do more justice. Whereas for general IT controls, let's say in terms of firewall access, in terms of network, in terms of change management, let's say code, in terms of interface testing where you're looking at database to database talking or code, right? There, an IT person with, let's say, more of an IT background or an IT frame of mind, right? Or a technical frame of mind. I would not say background, it's a technical frame of mind, will be able to do more justice. So one thing I would like to say is IS controls covers both ITGC as well as application. But for the sake of, how do I say, ease, we typically cover IT, when we talk about IT controls, we mostly consider ITGCs as IT controls. Okay. How do
sorry.
Yeah.
What you are saying for IT control is only covering GITC, or it also covers the application control also, right?
Yes. What I am saying is, in normal parlance, right, when you talk to someone, when you say IT controls, people typically will associate it with GITC testing only. Whereas it covers application controls as well, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we identify controls? Right. So controls can be identified by reviewing process documents, system configurations, right? So if I want to, let's say, understand a particular, want to identify control in the first place, how do I go about doing that? Right? I may say, okay, I have a purchase process. In a purchase process, or rather, let's take an IT process itself. I have a change management happening, right? Let's say somebody raises a request for change. Okay, that request is basically routed through my ticketing system, and that goes automatically to the department head for their approval, right? Only if the department head approves, it basically goes to IT, the IT team for consideration, right? And basically, the IT team will then ask for a business justification along with an impact analysis. So, in this, at least the short brief I have given, can anyone tell me what would be the control in this scenario?
Sorry, what's the question again?
Yeah, okay. I want to come to that. So I'll repeat myself once again. Okay, I'm giving you a scenario here. Sorry, I could not have it written. Tomorrow I'll have it. Going forward, we will have a written scenario, so it's easy. You have a change management process where a user department, right, who needs some change in the system raises a request in the ticketing application. The request is automatically routed to the head of the department, who basically, once they approve in the system, it then automatically goes to IT team for further action. The IT team then asks for an impact analysis and basically a business justification. So in this particular process, what is the control that you would actually test?
One will be the access control. What is the justification is why this person needs that application, the access, and from the justification you identify is there any impact, and then the access control need to be reviewed.
Right, but what is the control? See, you are saying the steps, right, in terms of this. But what would you actually test as a control activity?
The first one,
sorry?
general IT control.
Yeah, so the control would be, yeah, what would you test? See, you are drafting the control, right? You are identifying and drafting the controls to test. So what is the control that you would draft in this scenario? What would your control sound like?
I think first will be the risk control, correct? The risk.
Yeah, the risk is basically unauthorized changes, okay, to the application. So what would your control sound like?
Access control.
That is one part of it.
Is it something to do with system configuration?
Yes, that is also one part of it.
And regarding the approvals, automation approvals.
Yep, exactly. But how would it sound? Exactly, you're right. So how would it sound? How would the control wording be, right? Okay, yeah, okay. So how would the control wording be? So, okay, it will basically be more like changes to the system, right, are made by the only IT team only after approval by the HOD in the ticketing tool. So this is just a wording, right? You can word it the way, whatever way, but this is the gist of what exactly you would test as part of the process, because there are multiple steps here. You have the user raising the request, you have the HOD approving it, you have the IT team justifying it, right? But what exactly is the control connecting all the three? It is your approval, automation, approval automation. So one aspect you would look at is whether HOD approves. The second aspect you would look at is what is the ticket, how is the ticketing system configured? So you would have another control would be the ticketing system is automatically configured to route the approvals, right, to the correct person based on the schedule of authority. I know I'm throwing some this one your way, but the point is, this is what happens is if the controls don't get drafted correctly, right? I know a lot of you would have seen it. If the control is not drafted appropriately, when you actually start testing it, you will realize that, okay, how do I actually test this? No, it does not making any sense. So that's where control drafting also becomes very, very important. And the reason I mentioned this specifically, how it would sound, is because the way you write it, right, or the way it is basically drafted will determine exactly what you're going to test for that particular control. A lot of times, we take basically controls which the client has already drafted. We just take those and we do the testing around it. But a lot of times it will help if, let's say, if you feel that the control wording is not in line with what is required, or it is not, it's very difficult to test, for example. Then in that scenario, you will have to suggest to them as well, saying that, please modify the wording to sound like this. I know it's not easy always, but just that is one point to consider when you are basically identifying your IT controls as well.
So are you saying in the change management control document, you to word it such that the respective approval is done to validate it? Is that right? Or...
Yes. So basically, the change is done only after the approval, right? Or the change is validated through the approval.
Yeah, sure. That's the standard procedure. It should be, the section head, and then if sometimes some organization has another IT head approving before the IT person does the work.
Yes. So the point is, how is that documented? In the sense, how is the control drafted? That is also very, very important.
So that will be drafted in the access control matrix, correct? Of the approval, or my opinion, it will be drafted in the access control matrix. Maybe in the policy document that these are the steps need to be done under the access control.
Absolutely. But again, I will beg to differ. I would say it will come under change management, right? Because what is the purpose of the control? The purpose of the control is to validate your change, not validate your access. So the again, how the control would get drafted and where it will come is basically depending on what we discuss. So in this scenario, it would be more appropriate from a change management policy, because it's part of your change management. You can't do a change unless you have this approval in place.
Yeah, okay, agreed.
Second part of this, as you said, from an access standpoint, the second part of this control would be somewhere in the access control policy to say that application should be configured, or rather, the ticketing system should be configured in a way which basically matches the user with their HOD, so that the routing is done appropriately. Right? Okay. So you can do it in multiple places. You can do it in one place, but what my objective here was to basically say that the identification of control and the drafting of the control also is that important.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
The testing of the control becomes very difficult. Okay. Right. I think we are almost on top of the hour. So again, tomorrow, only thing is we will be starting at 10:30 tomorrow. I know today we started at 10. Tomorrow we'll be doing from 10:30 to 1 10:30 or 1, whichever works for you guys. So, that's the plan for tomorrow. And yeah, any questions? I know I'm just been going on. So any questions up to now, whatever you have discussed? Questions, thoughts, suggestions?
No, Taga, I'm good with the explanations and the ideas which you gave and the insights. Thank you for it.
Thanks, Balaji. Guys, any thoughts you have? Any suggestions also for tomorrow, or in terms of the content? Please do let me know.
No, I'm okay. Your explanation are like very good and to the point, and you are covering everything. So might be there is no question.
Thank you so much.
So when you, Mr. Taha, you said, so right now you are going through a control. Will you be also talking about, cloud in terms of controls related to cloud environment?
Yes, but cloud I'll cover more towards the end, in the sense maybe later sessions.
Sure.
To basically show, let's say, how do you test access in a cloud, right?
Okay.
Again, I'm also not a cloud expert, but at least I'll try to take you through.
Okay.
See, this is basics, right? To just show you how you can go about and see, let's say AWS, for example.
Okay,
right?
great.
So how do you go about and see? So just more on those lines.
Okay, one other area, how about privacy control on the cloud? Would you be covering? I mean, basically some information how the privacy control is taken care the cloud environment.
See, again, privacy is very wide, right? So what exactly is the area that we are wanting to understand? So, for example, let's say privacy includes data encryption, right? It includes access. It includes transmission. Right?
Okay.
Right. It includes governance in terms of DPO or data privacy officer or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover areas in terms of, rather than saying privacy or something, I will look at access. I will look at change management. I will look at maybe how encryption can be tested. I will maybe look at how a firewall can be tested. Right.
Okay. Great. So okay, you answered my question now. All right. Thanks.
So I'll maybe look at it like this, because that will help across, not just for a cloud, it will help for an application as well, right?
Yeah.
So that was. So one thing I would like to say is, when I do this, I will be using something called as virtual machines, right? Of course, I'll show you how I do it and how to do, in the sense, if you want to test something at home, how you yourself can do it, or use a VM at home. But yeah, that when it comes, I will definitely take you through that as well. So it will give you, in case you want to practice something at home. Today, you have a lot of resources. You can easily, if you want to look at, let's say, an access control, you can, but you don't know how to go to Linux and do it, right? So you have something called as VMs, which you can use on your own laptops or desktops and do it. So I'll take you through that, and I'll show a practical example of how you can test a control. If the client gives you an output, how do you validate whether that output is what exactly you should be seeing? So maybe not very in depth, but yes, definitely I'll take you through how we can do that as well.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Yep. Anything else? Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Deepti, you're there on the call? I'm not very sure whether she's there. So tomorrow we will start at 10:30. I hope everyone's fine with that. And you want me to wrap it up by 1, or the 1:30 is fine tomorrow?
As long as you can cover all the topics within the time frame.
I will ensure that we cover everything. Yeah.
That's fine.
It's still UAE time?
Sorry, Mona?
It's UAE time, Dubai time?
No, India 10:30 a.m.
It's mean 8:30 like today?
Half an hour plus. So if it's 8:30 today, 9 tomorrow. Yeah. Plus 30 minutes.
9? Okay, thank you.
Tomorrow would be 30 minutes later.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. I'll anyway have them send an invite across with the time tomorrow. So thank you so much, everyone. And thanks a lot for participating as well. And please do keep on asking questions going forward. So, yeah. Everyone, thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Tara.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Mr. Taha,
Yep.
are you still there? Okay. The question on, I'll be interested on the virtual machine. Is there anything, how do they, you have to access to any subscription, or is it?
I'll show you. When we are doing it, I'll show it. I'll show for everyone. I'll show where to download it. It's free. How to download, how to install, and how to access.
Okay.
So we'll do that. Right.
All right. Okay. We'll catch up. I'll catch up tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.